The House is resumed. Members, when we suspended last night, we were considering the Local Government Water Services Bill and we're debating Part 1. Part 1 is a debate on clauses 3 to 6A, preliminary provisions and Schedule 1. The question again is that Part 1 stand part. Tangi Utikere.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and good morning. And it's good to be able to resume contributions and questions in Part 1 of what is a fairly lengthy bill. I want to just reiterate, perhaps for the Minister's benefit and other colleagues, just the position that we sort of were heading down when we were considering this last night. We had some issues with the flexibility component that the Minister has started to address, not necessarily the sustainability part and how that might be undermined by that sense of Bitsyism or fragmentation of the possible service delivery opportunities. We still stand by the amendment by Land Farm, or amendments plural, particularly around the environmental standards and the desire of the Minister to be able to intervene if necessary, but only where there is an actual issue, not a perceived issue, but an actual issue when it comes to water service delivery. One of the things that I didn't get a chance to touch on last night, sir, was the Labour Party's position on where the environmental objectives sit in the purpose, and it's a little bit light, unfortunately, for our liking here. We would like to see a little bit more focus in that area. And my question to the Minister in that regard is why has he not sought to beef up the environmental protection or standards as part of the purpose clause in Part 1 of this bill? I look forward perhaps to the Minister providing a response around the question that still has not been addressed fully, and that is the interpretation section, whether there is a risk there that there is an opportunity for what's sought to be achieved here to be undermined as a result of the risk around inconsistent application for councils across there. And I note the Minister is seeking advice, but perhaps he'll be able to answer that question shortly. I do think it is very interesting that, you know, this is a bill that has the generic inclusion around this is an act that binds the Crown. Now, we've got no issue with that. However, this might be a bill that binds the Crown but fails to bind it to any financial support for councils around the country. And so there is that level of inconsistency there. And I invite the Minister to perhaps respond to that. The final point I'd like to raise, and this goes back to Dr. Shunan's contribution late last night around Schedule 1, because there are still some issues with Schedule 1. I'd like to draw the Minister's attention to Clause 8, Subclause 4 in Schedule 1. Now, this is a component that basically is about where a time period where a transfer is to be entered into, an agreement around transfer from one council organisation through to another. What's interesting is when this bill came before the House, it had no time frame associated, well, no specific time frame associated with this particular clause. What we see now in this schedule is the introduction of a time frame within which the clause must actually come into effect, and that's within 3 years. So it's specified there within 3 years after the date on which the clause comes into effect. Then there is a requirement that the territorial authority must enter into under A and B. And so my question to the Minister is, why are we now seeing a time frame for effectively the trigger for this particular course of action being introduced into Schedule 1.
Mr Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Thanks, members, for the question. In regards to the points raised by both aspects of the opposition around environmental standards, Mr Chair, I don't want to go into other parts of the bill, but for those that have read the bill, they will see in the next part they cover off quite clearly the objectives of water services providers. So I'm just simply noting that for navigation of those that are working their way through the bill, but they are covered there and deal with the questions that have been asked.
Celia Wade-Brown.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, and tēnā koe, Minister. I was reflecting on the questions I asked last night, and I've also been contacted. There were people watching our questions about water services last night as well, and I don't feel that I got any answer to whether small settlements like Parongaho were considered urban or not in the context, and I don't consider that I really received answers about the permeability and design issues and why the transport corridor was unilaterally ruled out, as given the corridor is often bigger than the road. So I appreciate that the Minister is aiming to answer people's questions. He's not brushing us off, he's not treating them as unimportant, but on reflecting on what I asked and what got answered last night, I wonder if he could be a little fuller in his response. Thank you.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And I'm still interested in this difference between water organisation and water service provider, and I note that the Minister just said there's more to come on water service providers, but it's still, there must be a reason why there are these two quite separate definitions. And now, going to Schedule 1, at Clause 8 that my colleague Tangi Aotearoa was just talking about, council-controlled organisations are deemed to be water organisations. And so there are some timeframes associated with that in Clause 8, and this is at page 339. But then you go back to the definition of water organisation, and the definition means, at B, a council-controlled organisation that, immediately before the commencement of this Act, was providing water services or has been established for the purpose of providing water services. So it catches both the existing council-controlled organisations and the ones that have been set up. And that same wording is repeated in Clause 8 at 1A, which deems those council-controlled organisations to be a water organisation. So I'm interested in why a deeming provision is needed in the schedule, and noting that there are some other timeframes associated with that Tangi Aotearoa was talking about, when it appears to be covered off in the definitions of a water organisation, and also given that I'm sure we will soon go to the other parts of the Act, if he could give a more fulsome comment on the importance of these terms, water organisation versus water service provider, and how they're different and how that's reflected through the drafting of the bill, I think that would be helpful.
Mr Chair, just into the response to the questions in regards to the urban-rural portion, and also the points around rural connections. Rural connections is covered in future parts of the bill, not the part that we're currently discussing. I'm happy to answer it when we get to that point. The context around what is definition between urban and rural, primarily that is a determination made by and through the district plans of the relevant councils, and so that's where that aspect is dealt with.
So enthusiastic this morning. Tom Rutherford.
I move that debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now closed. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. Aye. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called, but the clerk will conduct the party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima na poti whakahe.
Act New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Party Māori.
E rima na poti whakahe.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed to. Takutai Ferris's tabled amendment to amendment paper number 346, amending clause 3 brackets A brackets Roman numerals 2 is out of order as not being in the correct form of legislation. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 1 set out on amendment paper number 346 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. No. Party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima nā pōti whakahē.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
E rima nā pōti whakahē.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed to. The question is that Takutai Ferris's amendment to clause 3 to insert new paragraph AA be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it.
No, have it.
A party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima nā pōti whakaai.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
E rima nā pōti whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed to. 9 farms 2 and 8, the tabled amendments to replace clause 3B, Roman numeral 1, are both out of order as being inconsistent with the previous decision of the committee. 9 farms tabled amendment to clause 3 to insert new paragraph C is out of order as being inconsistent with the previous decision of the committee. The question is that Takutai Ferris's amendment to replace clause 6A be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct the party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima nā pōti whakaai.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
E rima nā pōti whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed to. The question is that Part 1, as amended, stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it.
Party vote.
Party vote has been called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumārima nā pōti whakahē.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
E rima nā pōti whakahē.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed to. We now come to the debate on Part 2. Part 2 is the debate on clauses 7 to 58H, structural arrangements for providing water schedules and Schedule 2. The question is that Part 2 stand part.
Mr. Chair.
Before I take a call, just to remind people, it is clauses 7 to 58H, and it would help the House if you referred to the sections or clauses in your interventions, and the page number of the document that you're referring to, because it's quite a big document. That would be very helpful. Tangi te kere.
Kia rana, me te kamata. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and happy to follow your direction in that space. It's the intention of Labour members, given your comments, sir, that it is a big document, to attempt to tackle this subpart by subpart. Seems to be a more conscious sort of effort to keep tabs on where things are. So I'll restrict my subpart to my contributions to subpart 1 first, which I had noted is clauses 8 through to 30F. Mr. Chair, this is a really significant part of this bill. Effectively, this does set in train the arrangements for the provision of the water services. And from the outset, sir, and if you would like a specific reference, I'll do that in terms of where we're heading. But clause 7 in particular is the outline of where things are heading. And so I'll restrict my comments and contributions to clause 7, which is on page 37 of the document that I'm working off, which includes the report from the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. Fundamentally, the position that we adopt, sir, is one of opposition to what is clearly a decentralised model, allowing councils to opt out of an opportunity for regional collaboration. Now, the Minister and this government might take a different view and say that regional collaboration still exists. Well, the evidence that is currently before this House strongly signifies that that is far from the case. We have a number of councils that are going it alone. We have a number of councils that are in models that are going to cause significant hardship to ratepayers further down the track. And so my very first question, having prefaced that to the Minister, is how he can continue to suggest that this is a model that does lead to regional collaboration. What incentivisation is there for any aspects of regional collaboration in this particular space? And we will hear, as part of this particular subpart, certainly from Labour members, about the impact potentially and questions around the applicability of the proposals for their particular districts and areas around the country, and they do vary, and that's accepted. And I do hope that the Minister is not going to adopt a view of one, well, we have to wait and see in terms of when those decisions are taken, because the public record does demonstrate that those decisions have already been taken, because they have been forced into effectively landing their water services delivery plan by the 3rd of September. And we can talk about the role that the Minister may take, and I know that he is on the public record of indicating that it is his hope that regional collaboration does take place. But Minister, this is a bill that does not incentivise. Where is the incentivisation in this bill that leads itself to councils actually wanting to work together? Where is it? Because it seems to be absent in the sense of no incentivisation for them to do so. And the difficulty that we have, of course, is that there are a number of different councils that have a different number of rate bases that fundamentally is the way in which they generate revenue to meet costs. When it comes to that early first clause, clause 7, the outline of this, in terms of subpart 1, how can he justify that there is a prudent approach to this, but also one that meets the various needs of different communities when it comes to water services and water provision? And I think of the opportunities there that do exist around that, but also the regional accountability. Where is that? Where does the Minister see the regional accountability? And he may very well say, well, that's going to come later when it comes to the annual reports. We all know that annual reports are exactly that. They're done on an annual basis. Where is the accountability on day 7, 8, 9, 37, whatever? where water services fail and that accountability doesn't exist. So that's the first aspect, is how he justifies the complexity of these arrangements where there was more certainty around collaboration in the former model.
Mr Chair.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair. Well, I'll be measured in my response to that, but it is ironic when the member is seeking clarification from me of where are the incentives. To translate that for those at home, that means where is the blank cheque from ratepayers' back pockets and taxpayers' pocket to pay for councils that aren't performing? That's just a translation for those at home that are watching when he says, where's the incentives? Where's the magic money tree is another way to do it. But the reality is, and we're not going to go through this, we have a different position. Our key objective here is to ensure that councils are financially sustainable. We haven't dictated in terms of how they should structure. It is for them to determine with their local communities, and that is the mechanism. The evidence, as we stand, 5 weeks away from when the deadline for the plan is that the majority of councils will form together in regional groupings. That is the reality of where we're at, and those numbers are increasing and changing as we week. And guess what? That is without blank cheques being written by this government in order to incentivise councils to get it. They've done it off their own backs. They've done it with their communities in conjunction with iwi Māori. So the question in regards to Clause 7 in that context are points of difference between the two parties. I thought most people had moved on from that conversation after the election because it was pretty clear that New Zealanders did not support the prior reform. We're in a new space. I think what most Kiwis or every Kiwi wants is certainty around water infrastructure and investment, making sure those assets stay in local control and making sure that those assets are financially sustainable. And that's what this plan will deliver.
Lanfa.
I'm really keen to pick up on the key aspects of Part 2, and particularly those that relate to really Clause 7 through to 11, because these all set out really clearly the different methods that councils can use and consider when they're actually thinking about what structure of service provision arrangements will work for them. It's talking about regions in which regional councils can actually play a role in these potential multi-council entities, and the different methods for establishment and ownership, and that together, how that all works together under this Act. Now, the one thing that I'm unsure about with all of these sections, and I'd really appreciate the Minister's providing some answers for councils, because we're talking about this lack of incentives for them to actually work with their neighbours. And I think as someone who has been on a council previously, you want to know what all your options are. And what was unclear in all of these clauses is what actually would happen if a council works together in good faith with its neighbours, with other to establish these multi-entity structures, but then for whatever reason it's not working, or they actually want to remove themselves from these entities. Can councils actually exit multi-entity water service providers, or do they need the permission of all the shareholders, i.e. all the other councils who are actually part of that? And it would be really good for the Minister to address this directly, particularly because we know councils are live in their consultation, in their considerations right now, because like the development of this bill, they are also moving at pace to make sure that they are setting up the right structures and have the right information and assessments to actually advise, deliberate, and then decide on what those structures are for their communities. But they, I guess, need to know the end game. And if going into these aspects and entities in good faith, they do find that actually, ultimately, they're not in the best interest of their community, at what point in time can they actually remove themselves? Are there clear guidelines for this? Because I think rather than councils using that as a way, as kind of like a get out of jail card for if things go wrong, it might actually encourage them to be bolder and to make better decisions and to go further than they otherwise would have if they don't need to be so cautious in feeling like, you know, they need to have explored absolutely every avenue. They can be taking steps and exploring things, knowing that, you know, if things actually turn out not so great for their community, that they might be able to back out. So really interested in the Minister pointing out where in the bill that happens. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I direct members to Clause 15 of Part 2, which outlines the objectives of water services providers. It links to the questions that were asked in the last section in regards to environmental safeguards and things. It's very clear there in 15.1a, 3, 4 and 5, those aspects around quality of consumer expectations and also regulatory requirements. That includes RMA regulatory as well as water quality services. The question is do councils have options in terms of whether they stay in or out? Well, the short answer is those are local decisions made by local councils, and in short the answer is yes. Likewise, on the flip side, where you've seen a number of councils announce structures that have the mechanism to allow other councils to be part of that in the future, which is the opposite to what the member was referring to in terms of going alone. The criteria and the incentive is fundamentally under this reform that communities will have water services entities that are financially sustainable. That is the incentive. That is an enduring incentive. And the incentives and the objectives outlined, and the objectives under Clause 15 here, outline the components and in effect the meat on the bone around that. I think in terms of where we are and where we want to be in the future, having water services entities and water services across our communities delivered in a financially sustainable manner that meets water quality, environmental and health quality standards is a fundamental step change in terms of the status quo, and this model will deliver that.
Dr. Deborah Russell.
Mr. Chair, I want to draw the House's attention to some extraordinary statements that the Minister made in response to my colleague Tangi Utikiri's first contribution in this part of the debate in Part 2. And we were just looking at the outline part of this Act and trying to set up what is going on. Now, we're concerned obviously here about some of the financial matters that are going on here, and the Minister has used some interesting phrases and words. He said one of the objectives here is to provide good quality water. We all buy into that. But then he said, where is the blank cheque? And he followed that up with, where is the magic money tree? Where is the magical supply of good water? It doesn't come out of nowhere. The water that falls out of the sky might be quite good, but it actually needs to be treated. It actually needs to be put through pipes. It needs to arrive in people's houses. The wastewater needs to be taken away safely and processed. The stormwater needs to go where it needs to go. The water has to go through a whole series of processes. Where is the magic water services provision tree? Now that is a government that is extraordinarily going around saying we want rate caps. They are complaining about the fact that rates are contributing to inflation. At the same time, we have the Minister in the chair saying we've got to somehow provide water for free. There is no blank cheque, he said. There is no magic money tree. Who is going to pay? Now, the previous government had a good solution in place. The central government was going to help with the costs of water provision. Instead of just putting an unfunded mandate onto local bodies, as this government is doing, we were actually going to make a substantial financial contribution to ensuring that when we turn the tap on, that the water that comes out is safe to drink. That's what the people in Havelock North wanted, water that was safe to drink. and they didn't get it. There are people in this country who have been on boil water notices for 2 and 3 and 4 years. All they want is water that is safe to drink, but it does not come for free. The money has to come from somewhere. This government is pushing that cost onto local bodies, at the same time advocating for a rates cap. The cognitive dissonance is extraordinary. And so the Minister has opened this up by talking about where is the blank cheque, where is the magic money tree. How is he going to resolve what we could politely call cognitive dissonance between all the things that government wants? These are simply contradictory imperatives. And that's without even starting to think about the problem of orphan councils. There's a huge problem with orphan councils. Councils which have been left out of these regional water bodies that are forming. Councils that have been left to go it on their own. And I'd be careful over there, Mr. Joseph Mooney, because one of the councils that is sitting there as an orphan council is the Queenstown District Council. The Queenstown District Council. It's in trouble because the rate of growth there is so much that they're having real difficulty providing for it. I would be careful talking about it in Kaipara. Kaipara is an orphan council. It's been left out of all the arrangements for water services councils, of a rating base of just 12,000 rating units. How are they going to pay for water? This government is just holding a cudgel over their heads, telling them they've got to get with the party, telling them that they're going to have to pay for it somehow, and at the same time advocating for no rates increases. Those things do not add up. So the challenge for the Minister who said there is no blank cheque, that he said there is no magic money tree. Where, Minister, where is the magic water tree?
Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, well, maybe missed that, but I was just trying to work, what clause was it?
Mr. Chair.
Sally Wade Brown.
Kia ora. I just wanted to follow up if the Minister would like to elucidate some of his comments, and I will try to keep the temperature a little cooler. But I wonder if this is inevitable focus is going to push much stronger user pays at the expense of the public good. I wonder if the Minister would reflect on the fact that 18 councils have had their credit ratings downgraded, which doesn't just mean that new debt is going to be more expensive, but existing debt is going to be more expensive, and it is perfectly reasonable to spread the costs of infrastructure over the years so that current ratepayers do not have all of the costs. Does he expect, if we look at the parallels with roading infrastructure, central government makes a financial assistance rate available, which is variable by different governments for different priorities. State highways, of course, 100%, but local roads around about 50%, higher in some of the rural areas. This government returns half of the waste levy to local governments. I mean, not this government, governments ever since Nandor Tankshos brought in that bill, return it. So to dismiss the idea of partnership as some kind of money dream by councils, I find both inaccurate and patronising. I was quite keen to table, and I'll ask for leave of the House in a moment, but I just wanted to draw the Minister's attention to two graphs from my experience at Wellington City Council. Before I was Mayor, I was a councillor there with the Three Waters portfolio, and can I assure you and people listening that councils took water very seriously. 2009 we had a water conservation plan to try and avoid having the regional Whakatiki Dam. And the per capita litres per year went down 2006, 2007, went down 2007, 2008, and down 2008, 2009. We'd gone from 18% water leaks down to 12%. So there's a lovely graph. That can be found publicly, so maybe I don't want to table it. But if you also look at the amount of money that Wellington City put in, and this is just the CapEx for the three waters, when I began, it was about 22, 23 million. It went up consistently, whether it was Mayor Lester from Labour, whether it was Mayor Foster from New Zealand First, and then when it was Mayor Fano, it increased dramatically. Now, that is not altogether consistent with what was happening, with what was reducing. My point is that the earthquakes of 2013 and 2016 put up the cost for fixing our pipes extraordinarily. Yes, there are issues, but what I want the Minister to address is how councils can possibly square limiting rates rises and fixing, whether it is past investment, whether it is issues like floods, or whether it is issues like earthquakes, with his view that we should not be increasing rates at all.
Honourable Simon Watts.
I must say I am finding it difficult to be able to answer specific members' questions without a specific clause and general statement, but I do encourage, if I do that, I will do my best to do so. The points raised in regards to more generic terms around health funding, I would simply point the member to the fact that a number of councils have already submitted their plans for water services entities, and they have been approved. And that is a combination of go alone and also multi-council arrangements. There is a clear precedent for how this will and can work, and it's already happening in reality.
Just for further guidance for the House as well, this is a debate and members are able to respond to Minister's remarks, but that has to be done within reason. And so once you've made your point, please come back to the bill, because that will help this debate to flow more smoothly. Dr. Lawrence Sunan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question in terms of the interaction between Clause 8, Subclause 2, and also Clause 9, Subclause 4. Now, Clause 8 is quite straightforward. Territorial authorities is responsible for water services, but in Subclause 2, they may discharge its responsibility under Subclause 1 to a water organisation through a transfer agreement. And I have some questions around transfer agreement a little bit later. But one of the things that is possibly contradictory, so I'm looking for the Minister's clarification, and I see that submitters, particularly from local government, have also expressed similar concern around interpretation, is in 8, number 1, territorial authority may discharge responsibility toward the organisation. They may not, despite there being a water organisation. Is that a correct interpretation of that? Question 2, if a territorial authority discharges its responsibility to a water organisation, but Clause 9, Subclause 4, says that the territorial authority then continues to be responsible for ensuring provisions, albeit 4B does say other party to the contract arrangement, I would assume, includes a water organisation, but the responsibility in that sense still lies with territorial authority. And they are responsible for ensuring other parties exercise all regulatory requirement. So I guess the first question then, just to recap, the first question is, by using may, is there a situation where there is a water organisation but a territorial authority does not need to discharge the responsibility to it? And question B, question 2, if a territorial authority does in fact discharge its responsibility to a water organisation, how are they then still responsible and also need to ensure that other party to the contract or arrangement, i.e. a water organization, exercise its regulatory requirement? So those are my two questions now, but just to signal to the Minister, I have some questions around transfer agreement later.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to respond briefly to the Minister's response to the question I asked him around incentivisation, because what he has basically said to this committee is that incentives means the magical money tree and the blank cheque. That is the message that he is sending to councils, that actually we have no magic money tree, we have no blank cheque, although the decisions of this government indicate that when it comes to tobacco lobbyists and others, they take a different approach to that. So what this minister is basically confirming is that we are going to basically tie the hands of councils behind their backs and still expect them to do stuff, but we're not going to give them any funding for that. So perhaps I can rephrase the question for the minister, which is still related to clause 7, and that is perhaps not what incentive, but what support is the government going to be giving to councils to deliver on the water reform needs that this council is expecting them to do? Not an incentive, but what is the support? I'll leave that with the Minister. I'll move on now to clause 8 in subpart 1. And my colleague, the Honourable Dr Deborah Russell, has touched on this issue, which is not just colloquially known, but is well known as orphan councils. Orphan councils. Those who are left to fend for themselves, even though they may have wanted something different. And actually, when we look at the list of orphan councils that have been forced into becoming orphans, they are councils that have been forced into this particular decision because the neighbouring councils have already made their decision that they don't want to take on the additional costs and responsibilities that their ratepayers would have to bear as a result of having to upgrade water infrastructure needs in a neighbouring council. One that I want to specifically ask the question about, the Minister about, is whether he is concerned about these orphan councils. Minister, are you concerned about Queenstown Lakes District Council having to be an orphan council? And I note that the local Member of Parliament, the person who is elected by that community to represent them, is here in the chamber today. And so I look forward to, and members I'm sure would like to hear from him about what he is going to say about this water reform and what it means for his local community. Don't you worry, I'm going to talk about Palmerston North in a moment. That's the community that's elected me to represent their needs, and I'll be talking about that. And I'm sure that other members around the House will want to share with the Minister and ask him directly how that is fair about what this government is seeking to force onto councils without any support whatsoever. So when it comes to Queenstown, in the absence of hearing from the local member himself, we'll have to fill that gap for him. But it is a high growth council, but it has a low ratepayer base. That is accepted. When we look at the level of debt that is projected to increase for that community, it is quite a significant increase in less than a decade from now. So, Minister, my question is, what level of support, what was that, Mr Mooney?
They grow very quickly. Pay attention. There's a regional deal.
Oh, okay.
I can offer a call if there's going to be a substantial call. Fair enough. But I don't want conversations across the chamber. Okay? Tangi tikiri.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's interesting that members are saying, oh, he's not interested in talking about his own electorate. Look at the record, Mr Ducey. I'm very happy to talk about my own electorate, whether it's about health, whether it's about transport, whether it's about all sorts of other stuff. Now, the interesting thing is that we're not hearing from members in this contribution or asking the Minister about what it is that meets their needs. So we have Selwyn, for example. We have the member, we have Waimakariri and others that are making decisions, yet we have members who are chirping away, not prepared to take a substantive call because they don't want this on the record. They do not want this on the record about what it means for their community. So I'll get back to my question for the Minister, and that's about the orphan councils. When it comes to Queenstown, where a significant portion of what that debt is going to be in the next 10 years is over half, well, nearly 2/3, I understand, is for water infrastructure needs. So what concern does the Minister have for these self-determined orphans that he and his government are basically delivering in that space. What concern does he have for orphan councils that would like to have another choice but basically have no choice but to go it alone?
Mr. Chair.
Tom Rutherford.
I move the debate on this question now close.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair. And there is so much in this part that has serious implications to the bill, so it would be fantastic to be able to step through it. So I would like to speak directly to, as the Minister pointed out, the objectives of the water service providers. So this is all about Clause 15, which is on page 43 of the bill. Now, I note that the Minister directed us here when he was talking about basically the environmental considerations that exist within the bill. But what has been hugely disappointing about this select committee process and where it's landed is there's two key parts that were originally placed in this bill by this government that was about the objectives of a water service provider to provide water services that, one, provide safe drinking water to consumers, and two, do not have adverse effects on the environment. Now, unfortunately, in the process of the select committee, these have now been removed. And so what I am putting on the table today, and what I'd love the Minister and the government to consider, is actually reinserting both of those things. And the whole point of that is that they are literally the objectives that should be at the heart of the entire point of what us and communities and councils are trying to do here. And I really agree, and I'd like the Minister's thoughts about the proposition that we had from several submitters, but particularly Water New Zealand, to actually strengthen these objectives. Because Water New Zealand thought that the recasting of them, instead of objectives as obligations or requirements, would actually be far more directive and far more clear for shareholders that they need to pick up on these when they're setting their statement of expectations and their water services strategy. So I'm interested if the Minister has considered that. And then the first part I want to pick up on is the point around the removal of providing safe drinking water to consumers. And I'm actually really unclear where in the process this was actually removed, because I noted in an earlier version of the bill, version 18, that it still remains. And then perhaps I actually missed the very last meeting where we deliberated, so perhaps it happened there. But if anything, not only should it be put back in, but if anything, it should be expanded. And again, Water New Zealand made it really clear why. And they talked about the whole picture of this not being about safe drinking water, but it actually needs to be about safe wastewater and safe stormwater. And they talked about how they would like to see these clear provisions when it comes to both environmental and public health. And they talked about the failure to do so in terms of treating and disposing of wastewater can lead to these significant public health risks, which we have seen and do see, particularly when it comes to severe weather events. So they would like to see it expanded from just drinking water rather than removed entirely. The other aspect that I'm suggesting is reinstating do not have adverse effects on the environment. And the reason for this is there were a lot of submitters who picked up on this and also talked about it. And the fact is that this whole bill and the uplift in investment needs to be fit for purpose, and it needs to be at a level of investment that actually delivers clear outcomes, not only for our communities, but particularly for our environment. And I know the rationale about, there being a regulator and that, they can do the environmental regulation and the pickup of this. Mr. Chair, I'd really like to just finish this call. Thank you.
Simon Watts, and then I'll come back to you.
I'll respond to those questions the members asking. First and foremost, Lawrence Yunan's questions in regards to subclause 8.2. Primarily what you're seeing play through there is flexibility within the bill. There is instances where a council is not required to have a water organisation, so that's why the word may is included there. Subclause 9.4 does not apply if there is a water organisation, and that as is clarified in subclause 9.3, which limits subclause 9.4. So that's the interplay between those two aspects. So the question raised by Tangi Aotearoa in regards to what support. The government has a number of mechanisms in play to support councils. First and foremost, the Department of Internal Affairs provides and has and continues to provide significant support to individual councils to help them in the preparation of their water services plans. We do have one council observer in play at the moment, which is coming to an end in Wellington, and we have council facilitator or DIA facilitators that are in certain regions working with those councils to bring them together. In terms of the funding and financing mechanism, which has been referred to, the mechanisms and tools available under the LGFA have been broadened, and they provide mechanisms in order to match the funding and financing for these entities or for individual councils to match the asset life. One of the major challenges is the cost of infrastructure, and one of the major mechanisms in terms of the pressure on rates is that the funding of that infrastructure is done reasonably short term. The funding of the infrastructure should match its asset life. Water pipes last for maybe up to 100 years. We therefore need to spread that cost because future generations will benefit alongside those here today. And that's the fundamental complexity and opportunity within how you fund and finance local governments. And there's a wide range of points of difference in the current model. In terms of the questions from Lana Farmer in regards to clause 15.1a6 and the challenge in regards to water environmental quality, it is very clear there that the clause 15 that I've referred to says meet all regulatory requirements, and it is fair to say that because of the importance of water quality from health and safety and the importance of the environmental, we have, and prior governments also have been supporters of the establishment of a water quality regulator that has powers of enforcement, powers to set consistent standards. And this bill simply acknowledges that we have that vehicle in addition. It's not us saying it's not important. Actually, the fact that we have that mechanism amplifies the critical importance of those two factors, which is primarily how the interaction between this bill and the other aspect of
Dr. Deborah Russell.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to raise an issue that, we're still working on subpart 1 of this really substantive part. So I want to go to subpart 1, clause 8. We've had a little bit of discussion of clause 8, but not the particular subclause that I'm interested in here, and I want to understand its interaction with with clause, where am I saying, 15 and clause 15. So the particular subclause says that, clause 8, territorial authority is responsible for providing water services. Subclause 1 is a territorial authority has to provide water services in its district in accordance with the Act. But then subclause 3 says, despite subsection 1, no person may require a territorial authority or water organisation to provide a water service to that person. That's got me really worried. And I want the Minister to explain, some of the how that fits with the objectives of a water services provider, which is to act in the best interests of current and future consumers and so on, to ensure that support housing growth and urban development. But I can just see a possibility here, and it is going to interact with later on in subpart 2 of this with subsection with clause I think 58F, closing down water services. What say a water authority just decides it doesn't want to supply water anymore to a particular consumer? Now I can get that this subsection, this clause might be in there so that if you've got, say, a large commercial entity coming on board which wants to use water, that the local water services authority might perhaps say, look mate, sorry, we can't actually supply water to you unless you contribute something to the upgrade of services and so on. I can see that kind of thing happening, but I can also see that a water services entity or a territorial authority might decide just can't be bothered supplying water to a particular group of people. Now that can be catered for, I think, under 58F. We'll have to have a look at that when we get to that bit. But I can also see that being used in a somewhat punitive fashion. You can imagine a troublesome ratepayer, and we all know who they are, and I know it seems absurd, but a territorial authority might decide that they are just not going to supply water to that person anymore. Now I can think of people who have been, if you like, troublesome ratepayers in my own area up in Auckland, people who are continually in the side of local government. I'm sure that the members in this House who have previously been on local body councils and entities will have the same people in mind, the people who write to them constantly, who raise protests and so on. So what I want to understand from the Minister is, it seems like an obscure possibility, but it is one. What protections are there in around this subclause 8.3? So you can't require a territorial authority or water organisation to provide a water service. What protections are there around the district territorial authority or water service to actually exercise that power reasonably? Now, there's stuff around small water services we're coming to later on. But I can just envisage the capacity for something quite unreasonable to be done in that space. So I'm assuming the Minister has thought of this, and I want to understand what protections are in place, what lengths a person might have to go to if a territorial authority or a water services authority is being unreasonable in its decision not to supply water services. So if the Minister could just take us through that and ensure that there are protections in place, particularly for ordinary people who don't have the resources to go to war with the local council. You always say, don't fight against City Hall, where you can see something going on here in that regard. So if the Minister could just turn his attention to that for a moment.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, I refer a member to clause 58F, subpart 3, subpart B, which outlines that any of these decisions to exercise the closure would need input from the Chief Medical Officer, which obviously has considerations around the community. Subpart C then outlines that there needs to be due process, including evaluation, reviews and adequate consideration in regards to that. And lastly, D ensures that the provision of all of that analysis and all of that decision making is in the public domain, which is another mechanism. So there's 3 examples of further, in effect, belts and braces around that decision that a water entity would need to undertake.
Joseph Burney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to just very brief.
Joseph Mooney, down. Joseph Mooney has got the call.
A very brief question just to respond to some of the, frankly, misinformed comments that we heard earlier, Mr. Chair, about the Queensland Lakes District Council. Can the Minister just confirm that councils aren't forced to consider different options, but they have different options, and in that case, the Queensland Lakes District Council has assessed a range of available options and settled on the one they wanted to look at was the Water Services Council-controlled organisation, which they consulted on with their community.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yes, I can confirm the member.
Mr. Chair. Rachel Boyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to take a call and to ask a couple of questions of the Minister. Can I also just put on record what an excellent local MP for Palmerston North we have sitting next to me. I've known the member for over 30 years, and I can assure you that all he ever does is talk about Palmerston North ad nauseum. So, an excellent local MP, I can assure you. Mr. Chair, I have some questions for the Minister, specifically coming back to Clause 9 around how services are provided under the legislation. And what particularly interests me is there is a issue between the decisions that have been made by the three councils across the top of the south, particularly the Nelson Tasman councils, that is actually at odds with how water services, well, at least some of the water services are provided. And this is going to cause some challenge, in my view, around where the accountability sits, where the investment comes, and it becomes inefficient, actually. And so the big example we can speak to is the Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit, which is a shared service between the Nelson and Tasman councils. It's the wastewater treatment plant in that area. And so for many years, our councils have actually worked together very well on water services and sharing those services and sharing decision making. But yet, under this legislation, in terms of setting up the provision of water services, they're staying separated. And what concerns me is that ultimately leads to greater costs to the ratepayer. They don't get the economies of scale of having just one organisation and entity that's set up on behalf of the two councils, and it becomes inefficient. And so that's going to essentially lead to greater costs for ratepayers. The other opportunity is that we've had massive investment in a particular project, the Waimea Dam, which is partially owned by Tasman District Council, but actually has real benefit to Nelson City Council. And there is some concern from the Tasman side that Nelson actually benefits through water provision through the dam, but hasn't contributed very much at all through its contribution, around a $5 million contribution. That's the sole contribution for that infrastructure. There could have been an opportunity under this legislation and under the rollout of it to ensure there's actually fairness across Nelson and Tasman around contributing to the costs of the dam. The people of Nelson have actually managed to get access to very, very cheap water infrastructure because of the way that has been overseen and governed, and that's not going to change. And is that actually fair for the people of Tasman? The other issue I just want to put on record is that Tasman is going to have significant infrastructure costs to recover from the recent damage. So that's transport, but also there is water services infrastructure that's going to need to be both fixed and improved. Tasman is seriously struggling in terms of its ability to access capital at the moment, and so how exactly, based on the Minister's earlier comments about there not being a magic money tree, how exactly can Tasman District Council in particular have some certainty and some opportunities to actually fund significant infrastructure going forward? The fact that they are going alone, we have 3 orphan councils across the top of the south. Tasman is one of the lowest areas in New Zealand in terms of productivity, in terms of incomes, huge rural area with significant amounts of infrastructure that's going to need upgrading, replacing and fixing, but a really small rating base when you look at it. And so parts of the Tasman district fall in my electorate of Nelson, but the people of Tasman are going to face a significant burden on their rates over coming years. And under this setup, there's no requirement, even though Nelson and Tasman are joined at the hip, work together on so many issues, we could have got some real efficiencies and collectively driven down cost for the whole region by actually having a joined up water services provision. It just is common sense. So where's the common sense? You know, there isn't any in this legislation, and where's the support going to come for the people of Tasman over coming years?
I did, before I take another call, I'm not going to take a closure motion just yet, but before we proceed, I did note that the previous chair alerted members to the fact to refer to the part and clause number that is being debated at the time, and ask, because the purpose of this is to interrogate the bill. So just alerting people to that fact. Celia Wade-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to refer to clause 10 in this section about transport corridors, and I'm wanting to follow up on a submission that Water New Zealand made on this bill. In particular, it says here that you should not a council should not transfer the ownership or control of any transport corridor stormwater infrastructure. So my first question to the Minister is how this is going to work with any kind of integrated catchment planning. Another question would be, when you get runoff, I mean, a lot of transport corridors are the overland water route in floods. And because of the way that our vehicles, whether it's the tyres, whether it's oil leaks, whatever, add contaminants to the stormwater, who is going to be responsible for that? Is it Waka Kotahi? Is it Kiwi Rail? We've talked about transport corridors mainly in terms of roading, but of course transport corridors include rail corridors. And of course if my colleague Julianne Genter has her way, there'll be a lot more trains going along those. Oh, possibly the Honourable Winston Peters as well. So the delineation of assets and ownership is complex, but the responsibilities for stormwater really ought to be clarified in my view. I'd like to also ask the Minister to clarify clause 10, that if you can't transfer ownership or control, can you choose to contract with a water organisation, or and a water organisation could be a trust or it could be a CCO, to manage the transport corridor stormwater network. So there we've got 9. One of the sub-clauses in 9 looking at how they can contract for management across the whole of the catchment network. So I look forward to hearing the Minister's points on that.
Thank you very much.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In regards to the questions on clauses 10 or 9 and 10 by the member in regards to transport corridors, basically what the bill recognises and balances is that in many parts of rural and provincial New Zealand in particular, the transport corridor is also the stormwater corridor. However, obviously having duplicate control and ownership is not an optimal state. And so what the bill allows is that councils can allocate management and operational responsibilities of those transport corridors to the water services entity, but not the ownership aspect of that. And I think that is reasonable. Its primary purpose is transport, acknowledging a secondary is stormwater. And in rural and provincial, the ratios are much higher than in other aspects. So that's the flexibility that's implemented as part of those two clauses. In regards to the questions around clause 9, in regards to the Tasman district, fundamentally the way in which the legislation is set up is that it is for that council and its ratepayers to make a decision in terms of the type of entity structure in which it chooses. They have not at this point submitted their draft plan, so I can't comment in regards to what that looks like, but we understand that that is very well advanced and will be coming. The point around why are they not forming a regional entity, While our mechanism is deliberately structured that is a decision for local communities between the Nelson community and the Tasman community potentially. I can't speak for them, but as the member is a local advocate on that side of it, and is obviously very keenly supportive of more regionalisation for the benefits in which she's outlined, which are no doubt reasonable, then that's the level at which it needs to be determined by the communities in order to come up with an entity structure.
Glenn Bennett.
Madam Chair, and I think you want to continue on this line of questioning around Clause 10 and the expectation of transport corridors. And I come from the perspective of New Plymouth and New Plymouth District Council, and so I was listening to the contribution from my Green colleague and from this side of the floor, and I've been listening, and I was looking up what the New Plymouth District Council actually was asking, because they've talked, and I've talked to them about clarity and the challenge they have when they're looking at Clause 10 is the transport corridors. They say, and I quote, clarification and clear directive of who is responsible for ownership, operation, maintenance of the stormwater networks within the transport corridor is required. So the thing around ownership, you've discussed that, you've given us some sort of an answer. Then there's the operation and maintenance. And as I look through Clause 10 and look at the preamble on it, it does explain a little bit about what this is. But the challenge for New Plymouth, and I'm sure for other councils, is around when you look, because they've got so many levers and so many responsibilities to be playing, and there's the integrated transport planning and what that looks like and where that fits in with a piece of legislation like this. And the expectation for the transport corridor is there clarity in the way that this clause is written around who the owner is, but also around the operation and maintenance of that space. And I continue and look at the responsibility when it comes to transport corridors and integrated plans and what other services are provided on many of these roads, Madam Chair. And I look at the challenge for another regional council in my area, which is Stratford District Council. Now, Stratford District Council is a mighty small council. I think, off the top of my head, just over 10,000 residents live in Stratford District. There's around about 3,000 dwellings. And in terms of their voter base, they have some real challenges. And recently, the council did some serious work around infrastructure, around transport, around a subdivision. And so they built a new subdivision. It was council supported and funded, but of course the infrastructure around the transport corridors into those spaces, then the stormwater, then the drinking water, as well as of course the power and the other infrastructures. So we look at what came back from Select Committee, and there's a whole lot that's been removed. So we have Part 10, the expectation on the transport corridor. We have 1 and 2, but then 3 has been removed. And I'm just concerned as I look at my colleagues from Stratford and I look at what the New Plymouth District Council is saying about clarification and a clear directive. And can the Minister assure this House that what the Minister is doing in this piece of legislation will clarify, will be clear, will be directive around ownership, around operation, and around maintenance of the stormwater networks?
Yeah, cool.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, so the clause that the member is referring to does articulate the points that I've noted already in my prior response in regards to the allocation or the ability to allocate operational and management responsibilities in regards to that. The questions raised by the member in regards to arrangements for transport corridors, Madam Chair, for the purpose of helping the member, is part of the next part, Part 3, Clause 176. I won't answer it here and I will in the next part.
Nancy Liu. Oh, sorry. A point of order, Celia Wade-Byrne.
Madam Chair, I seek leave to table 2 graphs that I referred to in a previous speech, a previous question.
They're not publicly available?
Not in this form, no. There was quite a lot of research to pull this together.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objection? Appears to be none.
Madam Chair.
Nancy Lou.
I move that debate on this question now close.
I have, in the short time I've been here, I've heard some repetition, so I'm just encouraging members that we need new material. I call Steve Abel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have new material. I'd like to refer, please. I'm not of that calibre as Celia Way-Brown. I have graphs in my mind. You know about that. Financial. I'd like to talk to clause 16, please, Madam Chair. Financial principles for water service providers, page 44. This is a very important clause insofar as it clarifies or may serve to have the effect of imputing an orientation of a water provider around its financial view of its role over its public service view of its role. I specifically have a question regarding point A. The wording says a water service provider must act in accordance with the following financial principles, and under A it ends with providing for growth. My question to the Minister is, in what sense does that clause mean growth? Does it mean economic growth, financial growth, or does it mean population growth? It's an important thing to understand because there's a colon after that first point, A, after which comes B, C, and D. And in point C, the provider's revenue and funding, including from charges and expenses and dividends, if applicable, must be transparent to the public. I think that there is a risk that if the interpretation of that term growth there is financial growth, and it's important to clarify what the sense of growth is meant, then the implication might be that dividends are an important part of the financial principles under which a water service provider should operate. There was clear feedback and submissions against the reference to dividends. Multiple submissions, including from councils and NGOs, disagreed with allowing water organisations to provide dividend payments to their shareholders. I'd appreciate also, as a second question, that the Minister clarify why there was a decision to include dividends, and furthermore the extent to which it contradicts the Local Government Auckland Council Act 2009, which prohibits the payment of dividends from water care to Auckland Council. For good reason, because I remember this very well. There was an extensive and rightful public debate about the first and essential purpose of a water provider being to provide safe, potable water to its constituents. And the idea that it should be trying to make a dividend out of it was very concerning. And there was significant concerns at the time around it being a precursor to privatisation of those water providers, which we know has happened all across the world. So I would seek clarification on why the Minister has chosen to include dividends. Furthermore, I would like to table or refer to the tabled amendment of my colleague Lan Farm, which would solve the problem of the confusion around the mention of dividends by removing dividends, if applicable, out of that clause 16(1)(c). I also want to refer, Madam Chair, to the core purpose of a water service provider, which is to ensure that everyone has access to safe drinking water as a basic human right. It should not be imputed or implied by this clause that somehow a service provider has a duty to provide a dividend. That is a problematic imputation. I wonder if the people in Gore right now, who in the last 2 weeks have been told they can't drink their water because of nitrate contamination, know whether there will be a dividend returned to the council by that water service provider. and whether that would be their expectation. What is the Minister's response to the effect of including dividends and a clause that says providing for growth insofar as it distorts the primary purpose and focus of a water provider, which is to provide safe, clean drinking water to the public? And I also refer in that regard to the table amendment of my colleague earlier to clause 15, which outlines that should be clearly stated that their task is to provide safe drinking water to consumers and that does not have an adverse effect on the environment.
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Oh, look, it's a reasonable question in the context of the entities and the way in which they operate. Under the current status quo in the model under prior governments, there are already CCO water entities that are operational. Think in a Christchurch sense in terms of city care, which already have mechanisms in play that have the ability, should they choose to do so, to provide dividends back into their council. Those entities are accountable to the ratepayer, and so that's the controls and mechanism in place. But the current status quo already has that mechanism. What is being done by this point in the legislation, and to the point the member raised around the distortion effect, if you look at clause 3B, it actually provides a clear mechanism. The organisation must not pay a dividend, etc., and refers back to 1B, which ensures that the revenue is being spent on providing the core purpose of the entity. So that aspect there deals as a protection mechanism to counteract, potentially a scenario that the member's saying. But at the end of the day, entities some already provide dividends back to their councils, but the way in which they do so is that they are accountable to the ratepayers. At the end of the day, ratepayers have a decision in regards to that, and they can convey that through to their councils in terms of their preference, but it simply reflects the status quo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, thank you also for the earlier guidance around repetition. I'm sure you may be aware that the opposition is being very purposeful in its approach to this part, and we've stuck strictly to subpart 1, and we're very happy to move on to subpart 2, but it would be helpful to get some guidance if that is the case, although there are a number of clauses that I'd like to touch on as well. Before I do that, can I just thank Mr Mooney for taking a call in this debate. The point, though, still remains in that there are councils such as the one that he has alluded to that still have little to no choice when they are basically left on their own. So not being able to collaborate with other councils because the other councils don't want them. So I'll make that particular point. I want to ask a question for the Minister. This relates to clause 11, and it is in the similar vein, albeit a different clause, to the question that my colleague Dr Russell touched on, and that really is around the transfer opportunities and the level of transparency and awareness around that. So my question to the Minister for clause 11, which is around the agreements that would be in place for transfers with a water organisation, is how he expects the transparency aspect to play out. How does he expect the public accountability in those agreements to be exactly that, public? Now, the answer to that could be perhaps that, well, that's a matter for the council. Nonetheless, the Minister does have some intervention rights and opportunities, and so my question is very simply around that one, around how he intends to ensure that there is a level of transparency in the transfer or transition agreements that would sort of flow from that. Madam Chair, one thing I have not had a chance to speak to, and it hasn't been addressed yet, is one of the amendment papers that is in my name. And it has been circulated well in advance of today's session, and it is amendment paper number 337. Now, this would seek to amend clause 9. It is a very simplistic a course of action that this amendment would take, but the implications, I think, would lend itself to encouraging regional collaboration. What it seeks to do is basically to delete paragraph A within clause 9 subclause 1. So it basically rules out as an option the ability for an authority to provide the water services itself directly. So in the case of Queenstown, perhaps would still be an opportunity to enter into an agreement, but would not allow councils to in-house have an opportunity to deliver on this. So I'm interested in the Minister's thoughts around my amendment paper. I do believe that that would, in some circumstances, encourage a further level of conversation with other councils and may invite further regional collaboration. I know the Minister has said, well, that's a matter for councils to think about in terms of which one they choose, but is the Minister open to supporting the amendment paper? And he might have information based on the plans that have been delivered well in advance of that 3rd of September deadline around how many of those are actually looking to adopt an approach which is providing the water services themselves in-house directly. So I'll look forward to the Minister's response.
Lawrence Zunam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two short questions for the Minister. Firstly, thank you, Minister, for responding to my earlier question around Clause 8, Subclause 2. That's very helpful to know that it's not so much that the territorial authority can discharge responsibility if there is a water organization, but the may implies the territorial authority has a choice on whether to have a water organization in the first place. So that's very helpful. I did mention to the Chair and to the Minister before, I have some questions around transfer agreement. And a specific section I want to focus on is Clause 13. When new transfer agreement is required. Now, the reason I want to focus on this part is, for example, in Clause 11, Subclause 2, there was a deliberate change where the article a water organization has been adjusted to the water organization. The use of a definite article instead of an indefinite article is significant in this case. And I think we're seeing similar potential confusion in 13, where in Clause 13, can I just check with the Minister that in Subclause 1, it mentions a water organization, but in Subclause A, it says to transfer to the water organization, that they were referring to the same organization. And I want to check with the Minister on, in these cases, is there a possibility to have more than one water organization, and can a territorial authority transfer from one water organization to another by means of this particular clause? Because I do know that, later on we'll see that Section 18 has certain limitations when it comes to contractual agreement, and the Minister before mentioned further along in Section 56F, which does cover sort of the closure of small water organizations. But what I'm not seeing as a part of 11, 12, and 13, 11A, 12, and 13 is what happens when a territorial authority wants to wrap up its ability, unless there's another clause, to have an organization or to retract the transferred agreement, if that makes sense. And can they just then move from one water organization to the other? So those two are my two questions around transfer agreement. My last question is, in Clause 15, Subclause 1, A1, and A2, I know the Minister has responded about A Roman numeral 2, but in the department report, there was no recommendation to move Roman numeral 1 for providing safe drinking water to consumers under Roman numeral 6. And my question is the rationale behind moving that, because I wondered, providing safe drinking water to consumers is a straightforward principle or straightforward objective, but by moving it under Roman numeral 6, it's responsible by providing drinking water that is safe for consumer, but preface it on having to meet regulatory requirements. Is meeting regulatory requirement exactly the same, comparable to being safe for consumer? Because what happens if the regulatory requirement itself may not be the same thing, and we have, shrunk the scope of that safe drinking water to consumer as a standalone objective. So those two are my three questions. Thank you.
The Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell.
Madam Chair, I want to follow on from my colleague Dr. Lawrence Yunan's questions around transfer arrangements and pick up on an aspect that he hasn't spoken about. So if we look at Clause 12, 1B, and in Clause 112B, it's talking about the purpose and effect of a transfer arrangement, and it has to be have to make sure that the effect of the agreement is transparent to the board, obviously, and the territorial authority, but then it can be, in Clause B it says, can be readily ascertained by the public. So that's, I just want to understand what the Minister has in mind by that, because frankly, board minutes and records of meetings and the like are not particularly, I mean, they're available, one can search them out, one can Google them. It takes a particular type of local body nerdy wonk to really go chasing after them. And I'm sure every member of this House would put themselves in that category. But nevertheless, to make sure it's readily ascertained by the public, I want to have an understanding from the Minister of how he envisaged that occurring and how the costs of that are to be borne. Readily ascertained, it doesn't mean you've got the local authority's going to have to put a letter in every ratepayer's letterbox, but it does imply that ratepayers need to know that it's happening, and then that they can find out the details of it in some pretty transparent way. So there's that first aspect of it. But relating to that readily ascertained by the public, I just want to clarify, because Clause 13 goes on to talk about when a new transfer agreement might be required. And it sort of, I want to be sure about something here. So it talks about how a water organisation might change what it's doing. Maybe it's going to take a new entity. Maybe Queenstown is going to get lucky after all and find that someone does want to talk to it. So there'd have to be a new arrangement formed. And obviously that sort of arrangement matters to the ratepayers, to the shareholders, to the territorial authorities and so on. And there are a variety of provisions in 13 as to how that process is to go ahead. I want to be sure, however, that a transfer agreement in Clause 12, which can be readily ascertained by the public, that a new transfer agreement is not some separate thing that doesn't have to be readily ascertained by the public, but actually falls under the Clause 12 idea of what a transfer agreement is. Now that to me is the obvious solution there, that a new transfer agreement is not an entirely separate thing from a transfer agreement, which can be readily ascertained by the public. But if just the Minister could clarify that in fact with a new transfer arrangement, that is expected to be readily ascertained by the public as well. So two questions there. How does that readily ascertainable work, and two, does it apply to new transfer agreements?
Yeah, I thank the member for the question. I refer the member to Clause 14, which stipulates clearly that the requirement there is for transfer agreements to be published, and that obviously provides context in terms of the transparency that's required that the member is alluding to.
I'm not going to take a closure motion. We are still on subpart 1 of this particular part, but can I encourage members to move on? I think we've had over an hour on subpart 1. I think it's time to move to subpart 2 and begin the questions there. Point of order.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Before I seek another call, can I just clarify there are still some amendment papers that have been tabled and had been up on the Legislation New Zealand website for the last couple of days that have not had an opportunity to be aired yet. Are you saying that I'm not able to refer to those as part of subpart 1?
Thank you for that point of order. The opportunity to speak to those is every time a member gets to their feet. Okay. Like I say, we have interrogated this subpart 1. for quite some time, I think it's time to move on to the next
Madam
page.
Chair.
Tangi Uti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will, having taken your guidance on that, I will refer to the amendment papers that are in my name that seek to amend Clause 17. This is something that has not been referred to by the Minister, so this committee stage is unaware as to the Minister's position on what has been not a tabled, but a circulated in advance. The Minister has had at least a couple of days to consider his position on this, and so in light of that I would welcome a response from him. To assist other members who might be interested, this is an attempt to provide some certainty in a number of really important areas in Clause 17. There is a requirement for a water service provider to continue the provision of water services. That's good. But what this amendment paper seeks to do, Madam Chair, is to provide some further assurances to the public and the community in 4 areas. The first, it relates to inserting 5 additional paragraphs after Clause 17 sub 2C. The first one is to ensure that there is no declination in freshwater quality or ecosystem within a service area. So that's the first one that would be introduced within this. The second one is basically ensuring that there is a requirement that the provider is able to identify how it is that an ongoing compliance with drinking water standards would be given effect to. So that's the second one. The third one is really in that public health realm. And my question to the Minister, given that a lot of the reform space has been from the genesis of what was experienced in Havelock North and in other parts of the Rohe as well, why does he not believe that there needs to be a compliance factor around public health obligations that would be introduced around paragraph F? Interested in the Minister's response around that. And then in G, there is an opportunity for ensuring that there is a level of community support for any proposed transfer and change that would follow. So this talks about introducing a referendum, which has not been mentioned in this committee stage at all, the possibility of a referendum. This is completely new, but whether or not the Minister would be inclined to support that. And then the final one, which follows from Dr. Russell's look at previous clauses, is around this accountability frame. And what this would do, this amendment, Madam Chair, it would introduce a requirement for a public annual meeting to be held within 6 months of the end of each financial year, and that would have an open opportunity for accountability, for questions to be posed. So my question specifically is on this amendment paper, hasn't been canvassed. Interested in the Minister's thoughts around that.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we hear your concerns about us cracking on with this part. I have a specific reference to Part 2, Clause 26 on page 55 of that, 26 bracket 3, which reads, if any of the options identified under subsection 1 involve a significant decision in relation to land or a body of water, the authority must take into account the relationship of Māori and their culture and traditions with their ancestral land, water, sites, waihitapu, valued flora and fauna, and other taonga. My question is why the wording take into account, which is sort of a lower bar, i.e. it's not a strong articulation. We have an amendment, my colleague Lan Farm, which proposes that it could be changed to seek to protect and provide for that list. I wonder if the Minister could reflect on that, noting that many submitters outlined this clause and that others should be amended to require councils to meaningfully consult with Māori. And in terms of the obligation of the Crown to protect taonga and ensure that Māori have the ability to express their tino rangatiratanga over their taonga and resources, it would be appropriate to strengthen the wording in that clause. Furthermore, I wonder if the Minister could reflect on where councils are obliged to give effect to not only treaty settlement obligations, for which there is now limited provision, but te tiriti o Waitangi itself more broadly when it comes to the rights and interests of unsettled iwi and hapu. Because of course, whether settled or not, Māori have the right of tino rangatiratanga, and te tiriti o Waitangi is an obligation of the Crown. So, in summary, I wonder if the Minister can reflect on whether he would consider strengthening that clause, which references appropriately and clearly the importance of the relationship of Māori and their culture with traditions, ancestral land, water sites, waihi tapu, valued flora and fauna, and other taonga. The wording of that is commendable, aside from the weakness in the preamble. Would he consider changing must take into account for must protect and provide for? Thank you.
The Honourable Simon
Madam
Watts.
Chair, I have reflected on the members of the opposition's amendment papers and have made a decision that I do not support them because I don't believe that they are going to be adding more than the amendments that have been made, over 300 or so, through the select committee process of which the members were part of. In regards to the answer to clause 26.3 by the member, the wording in subclause 26.3, as I outlined last night in a response to a similar question, is taken from the Local Government Act, and that has the precedent in terms of the way in which the interaction and responsibilities by councils and the treaty require, and those set precedents in the context of this bill that's on the table.
Honourable Dr Deborah Russell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one last question I wish to raise in respect of the clauses in subpart 1 of part 2. And it's just to do with the interaction of a couple of clauses. Let me see if I can find the financial principles clause 16, but also then the clause around obligations for entering into contracts, clause 22. And I want to draw the Minister's attention and in fact the House's attention to 22.3 and the preamble of 3. So this is on page 50 of the bill, not the amendment paper. And it says that before entering into a contract, provided determines to be a significant contract because it will create a public-private partnership. Now, I haven't had the time to work out where else public-private partnerships are contemplated in this bill. But I do want to link this back to 16. Now, here's the problem. Public-private partnerships may well be an appropriate model to use. It's an empirical case every single time. But the thing with a public-private contract is that the private partner in that partnership expects a return. All right, that's fair enough. That's why people make investments, and it's in order to earn a return. And we all do this all the time. It's a straightforward aspect of the way our society operates. We expect a return. And so anyone who's entering into a public-private partnership is going to have an eye to revenue streams, to the extent to which those revenue streams generate sufficient additional income that they can in turn pay a dividend. So so clause 16, as the Minister has explained to us, has said that we have to pay dividends responsibly. But I just see, I guess I see a real concern here that when we allow private entities to enter into our water services provision, that really accelerates the profit motive. Now, we want these entities to earn sufficient to be able to pay for the infrastructure, to pay for the water flows, to pay for, the wastewater, the stormwater, the drinking water. That's the point. But to what extent then, as soon as we have a public-private partnership in there, are we going to have a profit motive in there over and above the needs of maintaining the network? So I wonder if the Minister could just give us a bit of his thinking around the use of public-private contract partnerships in the context of water supply, and again, to what extent that profit motive is going to somewhat pull against many of the financial principles in clause 16 of this bill.
Yes, thank you, Member, for the question. The
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you. What this clause reflects is, in effect, belts and braces to the aspects that the member is referenced in regards to how these entities may interact with the water service entities. So, in regards to clause 22, subpart 4, it outlines there that a public-private partnership means a long-term contract for the delivery of water services, and it goes on to outline the specifics around that. The reality is that to have a financially sustainable model, you are going to have long-term contracts in order to deliver that. The current status quo before this legislation, an example is Veolia, which operates in Papakura in Auckland, has a contract with Watercare to provide long-term services. That's been in place for a long time. It is an example. The belts and braces of this ensure that there are appropriate controls and mechanisms outlined in subpart 22.3 primarily, and 22.4 to make sure that the considerations around those entities in the relationship have the appropriate controls around them to ensure that meets the requirements of the community.
Lan Farm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to point out as well how substantial this earlier part of the bill is, and particularly as someone who was on Finance and Expenditure Committee or sitting in that particularly for this bill, I want to make it really clear that this was an absolutely rushed process and time frame. And so there's big sections of this bill that have not actually had any scrutiny put on them. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to ask the Minister questions, put up our amendments and actually have a response back. Now, I want to thank my colleague Deborah Russell for picking up on the public-private partnerships, and I don't need to go into that, but I wanted to go into one specific aspect that the Minister has just raised as well, which I'd really like some consideration about. So that is about specifically the length of the water services contracts, and I have an amendment paper for these. Now, we heard actually from a number of submitters during the process that they were all really concerned, particularly about this 50-year maximum limit for contracting out these water services. Now, we can all have different ideas about the role of public-private partnerships and their benefits or not, but our concern that we share with many of submitters that submitted on this bill is about privatisation. And when you have particularly contracts which may be numerous in size, which may be at scale and are for such a long period of time, we're really concerned about that acting as de facto privatisation. So while we accept the need for public-private partnerships, particularly when it comes to major assets, we think the major provider should ideally always be the public entity, and that we're investing in that. If we are enabling commercial operators to actually hold these concessions, then that must be in line with all the purposes and the objectives, like the best interests, like the good employer tests, which are earlier in the objectives. However, we would like to see, and we'd like the Minister to consider, actually shortening the time frame within 2A, which is the subject of my proposed amendment, to replace 50 years with 20 years. And we think that that would be a more valid length of time in terms of essentially this once in a generation consideration of the arrangements within a natural contracting cycle. That seems very fit for purpose, particularly when we know that these are decisions that need to be, looked at as a community, and things really do change over decades. As part of this amendment as well, I'm suggesting at clause 2.1.2a, we actually insert clause 2b that says, for the avoidance of doubt, day-to-day operations must be provided by the public entity. And that's really to emphasise that we want investment in these public entities and them to hold as much of the contracts and be actually doing the work as possible. So I'd really appreciate the Minister's thoughts on those. Thank you.
Before I take the next call, I think subpart 2 has been well canvassed. There's further reference to the organisations in subpart 3, so can I suggest we move on to subpart 3?
Point of order.
Point of order, Tony.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just seek some clarity around that? Subpart 2 is primarily related to the role of regional councils in this, and I don't believe there have been contributions. It's a very short subpart, but there haven't been any contributions related to regional councils as far as I can
Well, to me, that's a signal that there were no questions about regional councils, if it hasn't been raised. And so we've moved on to the organisations in the amendment paper, so I'm suggesting we move to subpart 3 for that purpose.
Okay, Madam Chair.
I call Tangi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to subpart 3, which does relate to the water organisations. I did have an earlier amendment paper previous, but I'll leave that. I think the Minister's hasn't addressed it, but has given a response nonetheless. So subpart 3 in relation to clause 36 is effectively establishing the water organisations. One of the issues that I'm interested in hearing from the Minister, and it might be that he has a particular view around this, but clause 36 basically sets the organisations. My question to the Minister is, how will he ensure, if he intends to ensure at all, that those water organisations that will be established will not be used to privatise or effectively corporatise what are essential services? The water organisations themselves, Madam Chair, will undertake or are empowered to undertake any of the water services. Now, there is provision within the bill to separate that out if that's the decision that territorial authorities take. But it's not quite clear what the Minister's perspective on ensuring that any establishment opportunity for an organisation in this space is not going to be protected or allow for the privatisation effectively of water in this country. And it might be that the Minister can point us to a different part in the bill, or it might be that he wishes to put on record what his particular view around that is. But it is interesting, nonetheless. The other aspect is that this change in clause 36 sub 3A is around the preparation of the foundation documents. Now, this is something that hasn't been sort of transferred in from any other part of that clause. It is a new, discrete addition. And so my question to the Minister is, what sort of timeframes would exist alongside that? There are other timeframes in other corresponding parts of the bill that talk to when particular documents need to be lodged, when a strategy needs to be prepared. This is around the foundation documents, and it might be that that's actually all-encompassing in terms of the strategy document, and the fact that there is a trigger elsewhere in the bill negates the need for it to be specified here. But I'm interested in the Minister's response around that. When it comes to the ownership of the water organisation, and this specifically is outlined in clause 37, there are obviously a number of options depending on what particular role the councils, what particular track rather the councils take around this. I'm interested to hear from the Minister around whether there are higher levels of public accountability concerns with the nature and ownership of water organisations that are outlined there. For example, it is specified as to what a company needs. I think it's accepted that if a company is formed, it needs to comply with what the legislation is. There's no issue with that. But if there is, for example, an exemption that has been applied and one has been granted, where is the public accountability aspect that sits within this particular domain or this particular area when it relates to not just the nature within which the organisation is established, but the way in which it might be owned, particularly if it's being effectively set up outside of the council opportunities. And I guess the interesting thing there is that members, certainly on this side of the House, would be keen to get an understanding from the Minister around what protections exist to ensure that the future ownership of these organisations they remain in public ownership, or at the bare minimum, what sort of protections exist to ensure that the dilution of public ownership is not a particular pathway or a journey that heads down. So I'll leave with those questions for the Minister first.
Yes.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Deborah Russell. Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell.
Madam Chair, thank you. I'm looking at clause 40. It's around the governance of water organisations, and clause 40 itself concerns itself with the with the appointment of directors to a board, the boards of water organisations. So fairly straightforward, and the first one is the director must be appointed on the basis of their competency to perform the role, which absolutely straightforward. I'd hope they were all competent. But it's what I do find interesting is the people who are not able to be appointed as a director of a water organisation. And I'm assuming it's not because they're deemed to be incompetent, because the first one is elected members of territorial authorities. But I do just want to explore that a little bit. Also employees of territorial authorities can't be appointed, or employees that are shareholders or of water organisations. So basically, elected officials and employees can't be appointed to be directors of the organisation, of the Water Services organisation. I just want to query that a little bit in respect of the CEO of a water organisation. It's fairly common for CEOs to be on the board of an organisation. It's not an unheard of arrangement. I just want to clarify with the Minister. I'm assuming that perhaps the CEO might be an ex officio member of the board but not have voting rights or something like that. But obviously the CEO themselves is going to be highly competent, we would hope, in this space, and will have a great deal of knowledge to bring to the role. So I would be hoping there would be some reasonable arrangement that the CEO of the water organisation could, even if it will not sit on the board as a director, but to actually have board level input into the organisation and what it's doing. So that's the first question in respect of the board directors. Look, the second one is around elected members of a territorial authority. And again, that does seem pretty sensible to me. But I do wonder, I just want to clarify, I'm assuming that particular clause doesn't bar someone who has been an elected member of a territorial authority from being appointed to the board. Now, again, we've got a fair amount of precedent here at central government level where former ministers and MPs are appointed to boards, and for good reason. They bring a degree of experience of what it is to manage an organisation that is a somewhat political organisation. It has to have an ear to the political currents around the place to be appointed to boards. Sometimes they are public boards of public entities, sometimes they're boards of private entities. There is a real value they bring to that. So I just want to check with the member, local body politicians, people who've worked in that space of the provision of local body services, who understands the political currents. That's actually a valuable voice to be heard on the board. So if the Minister could clarify, currently elected members, obviously not to go on the board, but I'm assuming that former elected members might well be within scope to be appointed to the board, provided they have the required competencies.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Honourable Simon
In
Watts.
regards to the questions from members around accountability, the public accountability of water organisations is obviously through the councils or consumer trusts that are shareholders of these organisations. Councils and trustees are obviously elected by the public, and there are various requirements through the legislation and other mechanisms in regards to shareholders, in regards to their responsibilities, including through Part 4 of the bill, which I'm eagerly looking forward to progressing to. Clause 36 relates to the question in regards to privatisation and other protections. The water organisations are water service providers, and there are a range of protections against privatisation. For example, clauses 17 and 18 are requirements that only councils and trustees of consumer trusts can own a water organisation, as includes clause 37. Now, I know all the opposition members have read the bill, but that's where you see it in black and white. Question around, can a CEO of an organisation sit on the board? I mean, I'm not going to do an Institute of Directors 101 course on corporate governance, but I would go as far to say it's probably not good practice to have a chief executive being a member of your governance board, because last time I looked, governance boards set the strategy and actually employ the CEO. So a bit of conflict there. But I think what the member's referring to is prior members and other people, well, again, it comes down to the competency of individuals. The CEO would be part of and attend board meetings, no doubt, in their executive capacity alongside other people such as a CFO. But hopefully that clarifies the point.
I am torn about the detail we're getting down into, but I will take another call from Tangi Utakiri.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to touch a lot of this particular subpart 3 that you've indicated you'd like us to focus on is related to the mechanics as well of the consumer trust arrangements. And so I want to refer now to clause 45, which hasn't been referred to yet. This is the content of a trust deed for a consumer trust. And I guess, when we think about what's in a trust deed, they can, this can be fairly mundane from time to time, but it is still really important, the contents of the trust deed. I'm assuming from this, there's lots of legislation around that basically outline what needs to be contained within a deed or other documents, and the Minister hasn't quite responded to the foundation documents question yet either. But I'm assuming that this is not a simple sort of lift and shift from another piece of legislation, that this is a list of criteria or inclusions or considerations that is basically bespoke, because there has been some changes around the way in which conflicts of interest will be declared and pecuniary interests and the like. So my question for the Minister is, in preparing the list of items that must be in a trust deed, because the bill says that the trust must ensure that the deed provides for the following matters, why has the government not mandated for a stronger level of public engagement requirements in the trust deed? So that's the first question for the Minister, is what's lacking in that list is the ability for the consumer trust to turn their minds in an active way to how they would engage with the public about their activities. And I think that's a very keen sort of inclusion, because we are talking about the provision of water services that have a direct impact on communities. And so where is the sort of mandate around a stronger level of public engagement within the trust deed? Flowing on from that, of course, is the requirement for any trustee to reflect the diverse nature of communities. And I invite the Minister to point out where in that particular clause is the requirement for the deed to have consideration of communities. Because if we think about the fact that all of the different councils around New Zealand will be representative of different communities. In some populations it will be a largely rural community, in others it will be fairly urban, in others it will be a provincial sort of a mix of both worlds. So where in the trust deed is there a place for that? Maybe the Minister doesn't believe that should sit there. If not, then where in the scheme of things should there be a requirement to address those considerations? The other one that I want to touch on, Madam Chair, is related to clause 51, and this relates to the financial statements and the audits. Now, there has been some change to this clause within the bill. It originally did have a specific reference to practice related to the Financial Reporting Act of 2013. That's been removed. But the point that I want to identify, and the question I want to put to the Minister, is in a circumstance where a trustee of the trust willfully basically, doesn't comply with what's subsection 1, which is around the auditing nature of things, there is a specified consequence, and it is a convictable consequence, which is a fine of not exceeding $200,000. Now, in Select Committee, we come up against this all the time, right, where there is an offence that's being generated and then the penalty provisions are either drawn from another statute or there is some comparative with another statute to ensure that it's like for like and similar. So my question to the Minister is that penalty provision, where does that come from? Is it consistent with other similar offending? And it might be that it comes from a similar act, but I'd be interested in a response to that.
Lawrence Yunnan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, I just want to say that we really appreciate the Chair's guidance around when to move to the next subpart. And I just want to signal to Madam Chair that I have one very small question for subpart 3, and after this I will be moving on to subpart 4. But in terms of subpart 3, the one question I have is to do with clause 38 and limited role of water organizations. And I want to check with the Minister that in this case, water organizations must not do anything. Those are absolute terms. And one of the things that I'm curious about is why there wasn't a provision, at least in place, that allows clause 38 to be subjected to clause 55 to 58 around exemptions. Because in 55 to 58, it does allow for exemptions, and there is a swathe of process and also criteria that an order organization, for example, must meet before being eligible for such exemption. So I just want to check with the Minister, was there any consideration to include something like that in clause 38, so that way clause 38 isn't in absolute terms?
Madam Chair. I just would note, having watched the previous speaker and the chair and appreciating Mr. Junan's comments, I do feel like it's time now to move on to subpart 4. Thank you. Is there a quick question about subpart 3?
I've just got a quick question about a consideration of my
we'll make this
amendment.
the last question on subpart 3 and then we'll move on to subpart 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my suggested amendment, which I'll get straight to, is to delete clause 55, and this was really about, it was really great to hear the Minister assure us that there is essentially an avoidance of doubt clause which actually prohibits against essentially risk of privatisation. And I'm just suggesting we take that one step further in deleting clause 55.5, and this relates to the exemptions. And we had some really clear submissions, particularly from the grouping of Wellington councils and their mana whenua partners, Tauranga City Council also recommended the deletion of this clause because they saw it as the potential for a water organisation to be a cooperative company, and that this could be a possible avenue for privatisation. We also had Ngā Waihua o Pairangi and Ngāti Haua Iwi Trust noting their concerns with this, and also the Institute of Directors, who considered that councils should not be able to seek an exemption to the requirement that trustees have no other roles and responsibilities in relation to the water organisation. So my suggested amendment to further ensure that these water entities are protected from possible avenues of privatisation is to delete clause 55, and I'd like to hear that being considered. Thank you.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank the member for the question. Exemptions from clause 38 are provided for in clause 55.3. That's the reason why 55 is in place, and there was a prior question in regards to clause 38. In regards to the question on clause 45 around consumer trusts and how they deal with consumer engagement, clause 45 requires that a trust deed sets out how trustees will engage with consumers, and the ultimate accountability that is in place for consumer trusts is consumer trust elections, and that ensures that the accountability mechanism is in place.
Right, I'm just going to now indicate that we're moving on to subpart 4, so that's 58A through to 58H. Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. This is actually a really interesting part of this bill, because what it does is it provides a capacity, in fact a requirement for territorial authorities to actually assess the work that the water provider is doing in terms of, testing the quality of the water that's supplied and making sure that all the systems are working as specified. So I don't have a great deal to add in terms of the assessment of drinking water, or no particular questions around that, because I just some of that is so self-evident, but also that's obviously very much a response to the disasters of the past. What I want to focus on, I'll leave that drinking water to some other people who do know more about this. I just want to look at 58D, and in particular the assessment of communities' stormwater and wastewater services. I'm sure we're all aware of the huge amounts of rain that have been falling across this country in the last few days, and it's been falling again up in Mairohi in Auckland, around West Auckland, and we'll all remember the Aotearoa, yes, very much so ours, the disaster of the disaster of the Auckland anniversary floods. All right. Now, around the stormwater, so in 58D it says 1, a territorial authority must assess provision within the district of stormwater services, and then in 2, the purpose of the assessment is to assess from a public health perspective the provision of stormwater services. Now, obviously we want to assess the provision of stormwater services, I would hope, from obviously the threat to life, but I suppose we can call that a public health perspective, but it's kind of a little bit of an odd way to think. I would have thought the threat to life is worthy of thinking about in itself. In terms of a public health perspective, again, we'd think of assessing stormwater services in relation to the possible damage to property, a really known problem. But I just want to hear what the perspective is around that public health perspective. What does that sort of comprehend? A broad understanding of public health? Are we talking about the impact on people's mental health if the stormwater provisions aren't adequate? We know up in our area that children out at Piha and in Karikari have had nightmares when it rains. Is that the sort of thing that is intended within that public health perspective. So I just wonder if the Minister could talk a little bit about what is intended from that public health perspective, aside from the obvious dangers to life and limb. Are we talking about things like potential disease, but also some of the mental health aspects that go along with, well, inadequate stormwater protection? So a little around that would be very helpful.
Steve Abel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very important part, subpart 4. I'm on 58A and specifically 58B, actually. 58A speaks to the definitions of relations to water services, and we have significant problem or potential problem. 58A B brackets. A drinking water supplier, this is the bottom of page 79, a drinking water supplier has persistently failed to comply with the requirements of the Services Act 2021. There is a risk to public health from the supply provided by a drinking water supplier. And if we cross the page to 58B, assessment of communities' access to drinking water. This is all around the obligation of a territorial authority to inform itself about the access that each community in its district has to drinking water services by undertaking an assessment of drinking water. If we go further down, that includes subclause 2D.II, that's line 19, I guess. Any reasonable foreseeable risk to the community's access to drinking water services in the future. And then further down at F, identify and assess any public health risks related to the drinking water services supplied to the community. And there'll be a logic to why I'm pointing out all these, these points in a moment. And then to G, bracket I, assess the consequences if the community loses access to drinking water services in the future or is provided with drinking water services that are deficient in any way, including the implications for the community's public health. The risk to the community's public health is a highly pertinent question. The obligations a water authority are required to meet are set by things such as the maximum acceptable value of certain contaminants. The most pertinent topical one of the day is nitrate right now, because literally Gore has just been told, a city of 8,000 people, that it needs to not drink its water about 10 days ago because it had exceeded the maximum acceptable value. And that is a risk for blue baby syndrome. There's also other emerging risks for chronic exposure, bowel cancer, and preterm birth is a risk at 5 milligrams, significantly lower than the maximum acceptable value. But I specifically asked in the last week the Gore Council what their obligation was to inform their residents of the health risks of nitrate at 7 milligrams per litre, which is what it's currently sitting at on average, which is to say it falls below the maximum acceptable value, but it is above emerging evidence of health risks. Namely, a Californian study from 2021 that shows that at 5 milligrams there is a 47% increase in the risk of preterm birth for pregnant people who are consuming nitrate at that level. So my question is, does the water provider have any obligation in its responsibility to provide drinking water services that impact a community's public health? Does it have any obligation to give advice to that community on the health implications of contaminants such as nitrate? Or does it simply have to meet the maximum acceptable value? And would it, for instance, Minister, be acceptable under these clauses and definitions for that council to advise the public that the water was perfectly safe to drink, even though there is scientific evidence and peer-reviewed literature that's showing that it is not perfectly safe to drink in the instance of gore at 7 milligrams. And my other point I would like to ask, which is totally related to that, is that where, as in the case of gore, it's very obvious the source of the nitrate. The nitrate contamination is an ongoing problem in that city, and I know from having been there and tested the water myself in a previous role, that the nitrate has been steadily rising over the course of, Madam Chair.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Members' points are out of scope of this bill because they relate to the fact that the water service providers' obligations are to comply with the water quality regulations. So all of that lovely stuff and conversation is nice, but it's not relevant to this section because the regulations in terms of water quality are outlined under the requirements for the water services regulator.
Tangi Utakere.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to turn to proposed clause 58F. Some colleagues have touched on the preceding clauses around what information is to be made available for the assessment of services and the like. This clause is very specific and it relates to the possible transfer or the closure of small water services. And that's the first question for the Minister, is the definition of a small water service, because when one looks at the interpretation section, there is no definition, as I can see, for a small water service. And what this subpart 4 helpfully does actually is it identifies for the purposes of this subpart the definitions in there, and likewise there is no definition for a small water service. So I'd like to understand what that actually looks like in terms of how many numbers we are talking there. But when we look at 58F1B, this is the trigger really, is that there is a service that has been operated by a provider, but that it is no longer appropriate to maintain. So the question for the Minister is, what leads to that inappropriateness? Because the preceding clauses are talking about where in circumstances where a problem has perhaps been identified. I don't think that's what is meant by it's no longer appropriate to maintain, let alone operate. Are we talking about the fact that it has already been decommissioned, or the infrastructure is in a state in which it is not able to be operated or is non-functional? So just interested in what that actually means. The rest of that particular clause, Madam Chair, talks about basically leading up to what is a vote or a binding referendum for ratepayers in that particular community. Now, there is a requirement helpfully outlined that talks about the provider, there's certain things, the number of folk, and it might be that fewer than 200 is the trigger for a small provider. I don't know, it's not actually, I can't see it defined there. But there is a requirement for the provider to consult with the medical officer of health. Now, in the preceding clauses, the nature of what individuals need to be consulted on for assessment purposes is outlined. Here, there is no description or definition around what it is that the medical officer of health is seeking to be consulted on. Now, we know, and councils know, that when it comes to district licensing committees, they're provided with an opportunity as a statutory officer to provide a view on that. What is it that the medical officer of health is to be providing in that particular sense? And, that it's appropriate that there is a role there, but it'd be interesting to understand what that is. But once that information has been provided, when we go to subclause 3D Roman 2, it talks about, I assume for the purpose of the referendum, making all of this information publicly available. Now, that's all good and well. However, it talks about it being made publicly available in a balanced and a timely manner. Now, timely manner, we can probably understand that, but what is this balanced perspective? Because when it comes to medical officer of health considerations and information, balance from one district to another, from one community to another, could be very, very different. So I'm interested in what guides that balanced approach? Timely, we can understand there is effectively a time frame, but is it just the provision of all the information? If so, why is that not stipulated here in the clause? The other thing, just finally on this, Minister, is the trigger points for change. So in F1 and 2, it talks about the 75% threshold for effectively shutting down the provision of the service, whereas the transfer is 50%. So why the different thresholds between the two? 75% for closing the provision or getting rid of the service, and 50% for retaining but transferring it across to another provider.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair. Simon Watts.
So clause 58F subpart 3A refers to a number of 200 persons to provide a indication of 200 or fewer, which is the point that the members potentially getting to into the context around what is seen as small. There is no subsequent definition of what is small, but the context around 200 provides some guidance. The subclause F provides the belts and braces around the referendum that needs to apply if this decision is proceeded. And as you can see, it's a pretty comprehensive mechanism in order to provide protections around this. And I've already answered this question in prior responses in regards to points B, C and D. So again, I'm now repeating.
Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell, I want the questions to hone in now rather than being speeches, because we've spent a bit of time now on subclause 4. So I've got a couple of questions to ask here, Madam Chair. The first is around this 200 or fewer persons. Now, I'm contemplating a scenario where there are 200 people in an area, and then someone has a baby, all right? Suddenly makes it to 201. And it is curious because we're talking about the number of persons, not the number of connections. And what I want to understand is I guess there must have been a little bit of advice around this as to what were taken to be small organisations and the number of people, not connections, who are normally part of a small water service organisation. Now, there must have been a flex point where you go, there's too many people here. Why 200? Why not 150? Why not 300? Was it just, did officials do some survey work so that having a look at what might be called small water services and do some work and find it actually 200 kind of was a reasonably good demarcation between small and not so small? Or was it just a number dragged out of the air? So just to see a little bit of the background around that, I'm hoping that there aren't too many water services on the margin because we wouldn't want that. We'd want them to be clearly small or clearly big. So that's the first question there. But the other question there is around the referendum, and it talks about eligible voters, and that's got me a little bit more worried. All right, so voting eligibility in this country goes on permanent residence and citizenship and age. So the citizenship and age is fairly straightforward, but people who aren't permanent residents but are nevertheless perhaps paying rent, are affected by a water service closure, but wouldn't necessarily then have a say in whether or not the water services was going to continue to the property that they are in. Even people who can own might be able to do that. So there's a little bit of a worry there because this is talking about the provision of a service that everyone needs, but some people, because we're going on eligible voters, might be excluded from a say in whether or not the water service to their home continues. And there's a little bit of a further point here as well, as we've done it in terms of persons, but we can contemplate that in some large households might only have one vote for the household or 2 votes for the household. You can imagine a family with a number of children, whereas some households might be an older couple, maybe farming, maybe with some of their, or maybe not farming, a small community that they maybe have some tenants, they might end up with more votes per property. So I just want the Minister to give me a little bit of the thinking around that, around how we could determine the eligibility for voting based on need rather than the electoral voting, which is a slightly different matter. So that I get it in terms of who gets to vote for elected officials and things like that, but this is a referendum around whether a service is provided or not, and it's a slightly different matter. Again, there must be some thinking in behind this. I'd be interested to hear it.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, so the member has asked for clarification of where the 200 number comes from. The clause 58F is actually taken from the Local Government Act. The number of 200 is actually used in other aspects of legislation, including health legislation, in the context of quantification around that size. So that's the precedent. A reminder, while this is a long and complex bill, it has been for a full select committee process, and these type of detailed questions have been covered extensively through those conversations. So I am repeating a lot of that. Just because it's big, there has been a full process on that.
We're going to give, and I'm going to allow the opportunity to ask some questions on subpart 5. Steve Abel, you've got a question on subpart 5?
May I have one very quick one on subpart 4?
It'll have to be like that big, only because I saw you have a go before. Okay?
Have a go, yeah. Well, it's on the same question. Because the authority is required to provide safe drinking water, right? In accordance with the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai. Does a regional authority, in its duty of providing safe drinking water as part of its obligation and consistent with the clause 16 in terms of its financial duty, have any recourse to seek compensation from an industry or a party that is diminishing its ability to provide safe drinking water, i.e. through contaminating the drinking water? Because if the provider knows the cause of a contaminant, the source of a contaminant, and its duty is to provide for the public, does it have an ability to seek compensation from the entity that is causing the contamination? And there's a very specific instance of this, because I know in Gore they've literally just spent money to drill a bore so they can pump water from the Matoda River into the water supply to dilute it so that the nitrate is below the MAV. So they're spending public money to fix a contamination problem. Can they seek compensation from the entity that is causing the contamination?
I'm moving now on to subpart 5.
Exactly where I'm going.
Thank you.
For alerting us to subpart 5. We've been working from the ministers. The bill has come from Select Committee, and of course subpart 5 is in the ministers' amendment
I'm sure
paper.
previous speakers had been alerted to the subparts, because I've heard that comment already.
Well, news to me, Madam Speaker, but I'm very grateful to. Look, a very simple question from the Minister, because we've only just sort of gone, oh my goodness. Was this transferred from another part of the bill? Because I know we discussed these water services delivery plans in Select Committee. It must have been sitting somewhere else in the bill. If the Minister could just guide us to where this was originally in the bill, if it's been transferred in, if it's completely new, obviously we need to examine it, but I don't think it is. So can someone advise us as to where this came from in the bill? Oh, Madam Chair.
Tangi Utakiri.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And sorry, I thought the body language of the Minister sort of indicated that he was poised to respond to that, which is why he might be a little bit...
That was my hesitation.
Yes, across the House. Madam Chair, I want to look, in the absence of confirmation from the Minister that this is a simple transfer from elsewhere in the bill, I want to turn to what is proposed to be clause 58L, and this is when it comes to a water services delivery plan, the adoption and consultation. So we're working through a process throughout this country at the moment where, the water delivery plan is basically with the government before the end of the first week of, before the 30th before the 3rd of September. And that might be why in 58J2 we are seeing this, because it has the date there of 3 September, but will be at 2030. So interested to hear from the Minister around that. But I want to just look at this 58L, which is the adoption and consultation of the Water Services Delivery Plan. Now, it talks about the fact that the local territorial authority basically needs to adopt this plan by a resolution. The interesting thing, of course, is that we've just talked about and asked questions about a binding referendum outcome that has a 50% trigger and a 75% trigger for certain things. To ensure that there is a community level of support by way of elected members around local council decision-making tables, my question to the Minister is whether there was any thought around ensuring that there was a particular threshold that would need to be surpassed when the council basically passed that resolution. So, you know, it's not unheard of to have a particular higher threshold for certain decisions to be taken. Those that do have local government experience will know that often they are for things like setting aside standing orders of a committee or thereabouts. So my question to the Minister is, given that this is about the way in which water services in a community are to be delivered, and there will be lots of discussion and perhaps concern around that as communities think about what is the financial implication around that, and we hear that a lot at the moment as rates are going up as a result of the government's unfunded mandates and expectations onto councils. Was there any thought about having a different threshold around the adoption of a water services delivery plan, even if it was at 75%? This is to ensure that there is community buy-in around this. So that's the first question for the Minister.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Yeah, in regards to the clause reference, so as the member will see if on page 81 in the little small font under subpart 4, there's a little number there which refers to the Local Government Act reference. So just, I know the members read the bill, but just helping them again to identify clause 131. It's referring to the aspect in regards to the 200 number that I answered before.
Yeah.
Dan Bidwell.
I move the debate on this question now close.
Yeah.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakahe.
Act New Zealand. 11 in favour. New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakahe.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed. The question is that the Minister's tabled amendment to AP number 346 to replace clause 7(5) be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakahe.
Act New Zealand. 11 in favour. New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakahe.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 2 set out on AP number 346 as amended be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. Ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakahe.
Act New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakahe.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed. The question is that Tangi Utikiri's amendment to clause 9.1 set out on AP number 337 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tangi Utikiri's amendment to clause 15.1 set out on AP number 338 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Land Farms tabled amendment to clause 15.1a to insert new sub-paragraphs 1 and 2 be agreed to. All of those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it.
The ayes have it.
Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Takuta Ferris's tabled amendment to clause 15.1a to insert new subparagraph 2 regarding Te Mana o Te Wai be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Where's has tabled amendment to clause 15.1a to insert new subparagraph 2 requiring water services to be safe and accessible be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori. Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Where's has tabled amendment to clause 15.1b be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Where's has tabled amendment to clause 15.1b2 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Where's has tabled amendment to clause 15.1c2 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Land Farms tabled amendments to clause 16 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for. Please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tangi Utikiri's amendment to clause 17.2 set out on AP number 339 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand. 11 opposed. New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tangi Utikeri's amendment to clause 18.1 set out on AP number 340 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tangi Utikeri's amendment to clause 18.1 set out on AP number 341 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes against.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Land Farms tabled amendments to clause 21 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Taku Teferis's tabled amendment to clause 24.1a be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The ayes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Taku Teferis's tabled amendment to clause 24.2 to insert paragraph C be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Act New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Land Farms tabled amendment to clause 26 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Action New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Wheresa's tabled amendment to clause 36(1) be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote's been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Action New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Wheresa's tabled amendment to clause 36(3) be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Action New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Wheresa's tabled amendment to clause 36(3)(a) be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please.
New Zealand National.
49 votes against.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Action New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Land Farms tabled amendment to clause 37 to insert new subclause 2A be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Have it. Party vote has been called for, please.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Action New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Tāku Te Wheresa's tabled amendment to clause 40 to replace subclause 3 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Carl.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakaai.
Action New Zealand.
11 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
Rima ngā poti e whakaai.
The ayes are 54, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. Land Farms tabled amendment to delete clause 55.5 is out of order as being inconsistent with a previous decision of the committee. The question is that part 2 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No.
The ayes have it.
The noes have it.
Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National,
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour,
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand,
Te kaumarima ngā poti e whakahei.
Act New Zealand,
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First,
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori,
Rima ngā poti e whakahei.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 54. The question is agreed. Members, we now come to the debate on part 3, which is the debate on clauses 59 to 178A, the provision of water services, operational matters. Honourable Simon Watts.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're now over 4 hours
I omitted to say the question is that part 3 stand part. Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're now over 4 hours into a 6-part bill and we're at part 3. So I am looking forward to some good questions, but concise, taking into account this bill has been through a full select committee process.
Tangi Utakiri.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the Minister for that contribution. It's interesting because we've heard now a number of times that the Minister has said this has gone through a full select committee process.
It has.
And it has. The Minister's right, it has. Actually, we had to go through and it extended a little bit further because of the complexities and the regulatory approaches of this bill. That was the opportunity for the community and others to have their say. Just because something's gone through a full select committee process doesn't mean that we need to short-tail this particular opportunity for all members of the House who may not have been part of that select committee process to have their say. It's also an opportunity for us to scrutinise, for example, the amendments that the Minister seeks to address. So I do hope that the Minister will continue to engage in relation to the questions. What we are finding, of course, though, some of the questions gone unanswered, including the one about why we suddenly got this new subpart 5 appear in the Minister's own amendment paper. Now, I know he's the Minister of Revenue. We know he can count. The simple answer to that is now clear in this particular part, in that it was in this part and now it's in the other. So, let's not trifle, Minister, with the suggestion that, it's been through a full select committee process. It's also an opportunity for you to, my question, yes, I've got a question for the Minister, is why he didn't simply say that subpart 5 has been replaced from this section and you can find it in the other. He had plenty of opportunity to do that. Now, part 3, Madam Chair, relates to the operational matters for the provision of water services. And the approach from Labour members will be to stick specifically to the subparts. And Madam Chair, you've been very helpful in assisting the committee in terms of identifying that. So,
moving right along.
Thank you very much, very helpful as always. I want to identify clause 59A, and this is the purpose of the subpart before we get into the sort of subpart proper. My question to the Minister around this is, this here talks about the ability to charge for providing water services, and that they can't provide charges, they can't charge unless it's provided for in this particular section. My question to the Minister is how, again, he reconciles the purpose of fairness in terms of the overarching purpose of this bill with the risk that'll be a real risk of affordability, or more specifically unaffordability, for not just low-income households but for households all around the country. And so my question to the Minister is the provision of charges, which this will enable and allow, provided that criteria is met, how he reconciles that with what will be an inability for households around the country to be able to meet those particular charges and that particular need as well. I want to have a look at clause 60, and this is about the fact that the organisation may set charges and they can do so for all three waters, and also includes the trade waste services opportunity is there. So there aren't really any limitations or expectations that have been imposed by the provision of this particular clause. Question I have for the Minister is, where in the bill, Minister, is the potential around safeguards to ensure that there is not an inequitable level of charging that would flow from the organisation? So on the one hand, this empowers or permits the organisations to levy a charge against households. The question I have is, where is the provision in there that basically acts as a safeguard to ensure that there is some control, to ensure that there isn't an excessive level of charges being charged? Now, the Minister does have some powers in terms of the legislation that he's already referred to previously. I'm not talking about that in relation to previous. I'm talking about where in the bill is there this provision. This is the part that authorises the levy, but where is the ability for the Minister to intervene? Or is that not a concern that he believes is justified, that there will be inequities across households, whether low, medium income households, that will not have an ability to meet the affordability frame of this particular clause?
The Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also interested in 59A, the purpose of the subpart. So the purpose of the subpart is to provide water organisations with the ability to charge for providing water services. And we've heard just in that last contribution about this question around equity. What I'm still interested in and looking for from the Minister is a clear explanation about the difference and the use of the phrases throughout the legislation, including in this Part 3, of water organisations, which is a defined term, as opposed to a water services provider, also a defined term, defined in an earlier part of the bill, but it's relevant here because why is it that this subpart is just about water organisations and not water service providers? And linked to that is just the role of where the territorial authority and other councils sit within these definitions. Because over the page at 65, so on page 91, a water organisation and territorial authority must not both charge for a water service, and I understand that heading, that makes sense, but wouldn't a territorial authority be a water services provider if it wasn't a water organisation? And why then is the term territorial authority used rather than a water services provider? And it's just really to be very, asking the Minister to be clear in the legislation about why these terms are used and how the two sets of terms interact together, given that there is that overlap. And noting, going back to 59A, that it's talking about the purpose of the subpart is to provide water organisations, the defined term, with the ability to charge for providing water services. And then, of course, water services is a defined term and different from water services provider, which is the defined term, but here we have it providing water services. So I know that Parliamentary Council Office will have used those terms for specific reasons, and my question to the Minister as we get into the depths of the bill is, can he explain why, and where will we see that throughout the rest of the bill as well? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
In regards to questions on clauses 59 and 60 and specific questions around ministerial intervention powers, the ministerial intervention powers are outlined as part of the Local Government Act, not this Act, so they're not. It's not in scope in the context of the question for this part of the bill. However, the elements in addition to ministerial intervention powers also include the fact that under this model there will be economic regulation, and the economic regulator also has mechanisms and powers to intervene. In regards to the points around fair pricing and equities in regards to that, challenges in regards to charges and for those individuals and their means to pay, one of the key elements of economic regulation is that insurance that there will be the prices charged for water are fair prices in the context of the costs incurred in order to provide those services, and that again is a regulated area of the reform. So there is plenty of belts and braces in the context of protections around ensuring that the prices of water through this mechanism are appropriate, and when there are cases of hardship, then there are the mechanisms in that. In regards to the questions around defined terms, again, this was discussed at length through the Select Committee process.
Chair. The Honourable Julianne Genter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to interrupt the Honourable Rachel Brooking. I wanted to direct my questions to this whole subpart, but particularly around a subclause. So clause 61, subclause 3, a water organisation must not collect a charge for stormwater services from a corridor manager. We have real concerns about this because ultimately we've got all these different, we're trying to set up like a kind of user pays approach, right? I mean, that's my understanding of this system, is we're transitioning away from a sort of like general charges linked to rates and rateable value to more direct charging of people who are putting costs onto our different water networks or taking water out. And stormwater in particular is very, very influenced by urban development. It's influenced by transport infrastructure. And if we want to get better outcomes, there's huge opportunities to get much better outcomes for our community. And here, users of water, whether it's drinking water, wastewater, or stormwater, are all expected to be charged for it. But we're saying that the government is completely exempting corridor managers, and I'm wondering, so is that for ongoing costs, but at the point at which we're making decisions about which infrastructure to build and how to build it, it would make a lot of sense, I would think, if the people providing and managing the corridor were thinking about minimizing stormwater costs at the time of design of the project. Last year, I attended the World Green Infrastructure Congress in Auckland, and there have been developments right around the world where they're calling for a greener approach to infrastructure that can massively reduce the cost on our stormwater system. Yet, if we're excluding the ability of water organizations to charge for stormwater collection services from corridor managers, where is the incentive for the people designing and building the infrastructure to reduce the runoff of stormwater and the costs on the system? Who has the ability to require the infrastructure designer and provider to use low impact development, for example, which would reduce the cost on the reticulated system, but would also have a whole lot of co-benefits in terms of water quality, nature, amenity in the area. We're looking, I think back when we had those horrific floods, which are becoming very, very common now, up in Auckland, there was a big emphasis on sponge cities, and I'm just wondering, through this provision, if we're not allowing for direct charging, and who has the responsibility? Will a water organization presumably is not going to have the ability to regulate NZTA or councils in terms of their infrastructure, or a private developer in terms of their infrastructure design. So if you're relying on direct user charges, but we're excluding the ability of transport corridor managers to be charged, where is the incentive going to come from for the corridor manager to minimize the impact on the stormwater system? And this was, one of the reasons why the Green Party, even back when the last government was looking at Three Waters, was advocating for councils to retain stormwater. Because there's such a connection between urban development, transport, and stormwater. And there's a huge opportunity to mitigate costs and get better outcomes by doing things differently. But in order for us to do so, we need to have those costs be more direct. So now that it is potentially sitting with a water organization, whether that's a council or someone else they've put it down to, I'm just wondering about this clause 61, subclause 3, and why transport corridor managers have been excluded. If the minister could comment on that and what he sees. Is there any other, obviously with the amendment that was just dropped, there are a whole lot of technical tidy up changes to the bill, but is there anywhere providing for incentives for green infrastructure, particularly with the management of stormwater in this bill?
Yeah, I thank the member for the question, and I agree in principle, because the points that the member's making in regards to whether stormwater is in effect in or out are absolutely areas that I'm having flashbacks now of discussing in prior lives. That is the point of why we have given under this structure the choice around how that works. Auckland's a good example, right? We've got Healthy Waters, which sits outside of water care. In effect, water care is a water services entity, but stormwater sits outside. That works in that context, but in other parts of the country that's not applicable. So the choice around where stormwater sits is a determination for local communities, and there are examples of where it's included within an entity and where it's not. And our view is that's the most optimal way to deal with this, because of the reality of how stormwater is so heavily integrated, particularly in an urban setting, in regards to the way in which you've got parks and reserves and other multi-purpose venues. So again, horses for courses, but that's the way in which the flexibility of the bill allows for different circumstances.
The Honourable Rachel.
Thank you. Remaining on this topic about 61.3 and the transport corridor being exempt from a charge. The Minister, just in his response then to Honourable Julian Genter, said it's up to the local community to choose how they deal with stormwater. And I agree with both members, both Minister and member, that stormwater is a difficult issue to deal with. But what I'm interested to know is that some transport corridor manager, which is the phrase used, who cannot be charged, are not councils, I'm presuming, because if you go back to the definitions of transport corridor manager, there's nothing in the definition section. Transport corridor relates to section 4 of the Utilities Access Act 2010, I think. So presumably, and I apologise, I haven't looked up what that section says, but presumably a transport corridor manager could be NZTA, it could be a council. My question is, could it be anybody else? And if it is, I understand where it's a council, that the council is obviously related in the service provider as well. But what about when it is NZTA being a transport corridor manager, if that's a possibility? Why shouldn't there be a collection of charge? And also, can a transport corridor manager be a private organisation? So for instance, if you're doing a large subdivision somewhere, and you might have private roads within that subdivision, does that make you a transport corridor manager and mean that there cannot be a charge for those stormwater services? And going back to where it's NZTA, was there any consideration of the exemption in Part 1 for the Crown around development contributions not being paid to the Crown, a consideration of this exemption being part of the earlier on provision about where the Act binds the Crown or not? So a couple of questions in that. And, I know I was out for the Part 2 debate. I was meeting with Beef and Lamb. I acknowledge Minister Hoggard who's also been meeting with them, and they were telling me as part of that conversation that it is a large annoyance to them. This was a specific example that they gave of you can do a whole lot of wetland protection, but then there's a road and there's a flooding event and there's a stormwater runoff from the road, and then that they get blamed for it. So there are real difficult issues around roads and stormwater. And I want to also make the point the Minister, in his answer to my other question, was a non-answer. He said the Select Committee have traversed the issue of the phrases around water organisations and what it means, and the different phrasing in this in the bill. This opportunity that we have in the House in the committee stage is to get things on to Hansard and to have things explained in a way that they are not in the Select Committee report. And I wonder if the Minister understands the difference in those terms if he continues to refuse to answer this question. And so I encourage the Minister to rethink his answers where he just says things were discussed at Select Committee, and uses this opportunity to explain and to make his case, which will then be helpful for people who are coming to this very large bill and come across different clauses and wonder what it's about. But so two questions there. One is around this Transport Corridor Manager, who they are. Can it be private bodies as well as the NZTA, and did he consider the role of them? And presumably it's also councils. And secondly, if he can reconsider his answers that just refer back to the Select Committee. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
In regards to the questions around transport corridors, I refer the member to clause 176, which provides for the integrated management of that aspect. Each participant carries their own costs in regards to the way in which those components operate. And in regards to the other question, all I remember was the point around New Zealand beef and lamb, and I was just thinking, coming up to lunchtime and 5 hours into this bill, how hungry I am, and I was thinking of lamb chops, but I can't make any other further comment in regards to that question.
The Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Chair, so the question was around, and maybe he answered it.
Sorry.
Was around, could there be private roads that are considered, and also where does NZTA fit with it? And if NZTA is a transport corridor manager, should there not be some ability to charge for the stormwater service so the farmers don't get blamed?
Madam Chair.
Lawrence Sunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions, 2.5 questions for the Minister. The first one, the Minister has just before mentioned about water organisation having the choice. So I'm looking at 61.3, which my colleague, Honourable Julian Jenner, has touched on before. But can I just check, but Clause 3 doesn't allow there to be a choice because the wording is must not collect. So can I just check with the Minister what he means by choice? Also, just in terms of this section around stormwater, one of the things we did see in terms of the submission is around, which then allowed for the amendment to include a definition on stormwater service zone, is to do with the fact that a lot of the things we are currently seeing regarding stormwater management is around man-made infrastructure such as piping and etc. And I think this part, with regard to this part, but also in relation to what my colleague Honourable Julian Genta mentioned before, is how does that give allowances for alternative and more natural than man-made considerations to stormwater management. So that's my first questions around this. My second question is around section 60, subsection 3, on when setting a charge, the order organization may determine. Now, going through the department report, there's a number of considerations on things in terms of charges being assessed, due collected, and etc. But one of the things I haven't noticed in this, and I wanted to check with the Minister if that has been an active consideration, is whether charges can be deferred. Because what we see, for example, in terms of council rates, and the number of councils allowed the deferment of the payment of rates, particularly for those for senior citizens, for example, does this section also give allowances to deferment? if that has been a consideration. So those are my two questions. One of them is clarification on choice if the legislation specifically, subsection 3 of 61, specifically says must not, and around broader consideration of natural versus man-made stormwater management, and then also in terms of deferment of rates.
Madam Chair.
Tangi Utikiri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I note that the Minister's talked about the amount of time that this seems to be taking. So first question is to the Minister, is he expecting that this will be done before 1 o'clock, or is he actually prepared to work through some of the issues that have been raised to identify the fact that households in this country would rather he focus on ensuring that they can actually meet these costs rather than what he's going to have for lunch? That's the first question. Second question is around the modelling and whether or not there has been any modelling that has been done to assess the impact of what these provisions will mean for household budgets is the first one there. In terms of Clause 61, Clause 61 is about the additional requirements for setting the particular charges for stormwater services. The Minister has talked around the fact that there will be a fair process around some of these issues, and he's also talked about the ministerial intervention powers is not contained in this bill, it's in the Local Government Act. But how will the government, when it looks at Clause 61, ensure that stormwater charges are transparent and based on actual use that's being received, or does he suggest that that's actually something that doesn't fall within the government's remit but needs to be dealt with by the various service provision or providers that are stood up as a result of that? And then also interested in the same section around, or clause around, what protections, if any, are there for ratepayers who find themselves in areas where there might be informal forms of infrastructure or what could be described as legacy infrastructure over many years as well. I'd like to also touch on Clause 62, and this is about the serviceability charge where a property is not connected to the network. I guess there's a question there around whether that's going to be, there is a risk there depending on what councils opt for as to whether there is some certainty and consistency being provided, or whether there is going to be some variation, and whether the Minister is comfortable with that as well. So, you know, we all know that councils under this reform will adopt different approaches based on a handful of options, but when it comes to the serviceability charge, where does that particularly land itself or find itself? And the only other question that I have on 62 at this stage is again around the thresholds. We'd asked questions previously around where a referendum had been held, and the trigger point was 75% for one course of action and 50% for another course of action. So when it relates to Clause 62, subclause 3, where the property is 50% non-rateable land, as specified, then the organisation can only set a charge that is 50% of it. Why is it 50% is the particular threshold there, whereas land might actually be non-rateable at a higher threshold? Is it then not fair to assume that a higher threshold of the charge would be applicable or not? Or is it just it's a 50% mechanism and therefore 50% is easiest to pursue?
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
In regards to questions on Clause 62 and the member's question to me, am I comfortable with that? I am comfortable, and the due process in regards to that, again, has been well considered by officials and input from the Select Committee to enhance that. In regards to Clause 62.3, in regards to the percentage, I refer the member to that clause where it stipulates the Local Government Rating Act reference in regards to the proxy for that number, and that's the basis for.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to 70A and 70B, this is the waiver of water services charges. So 70A sets up that a water organisation may waive those charges, but it's got to do so in accordance with its waiver policy. And then you look down, and 70B is water organisation must adopt and publish waiver policy. What I'm interested in is the criteria around that waiver policy, because I was expecting to see that in 70B, but instead we just see that a water organisation must prepare and adopt a policy for a water services charge or a penalty, and when preparing that policy, they must use its significance and engagement policy to determine the amount of public consultation and the form of that consultation, and then it must make its waiver policy publicly available. So what seems to be missing from this clause is that there are no criteria about why they might be waiving it, and we heard in an earlier contribution from my colleague Tanya Aotearoa about whether or not there had been any equity considerations. So what are the types of criteria or circumstances that the Minister considers would be appropriate for a waiver policy? And would they include issues such as the ability to pay, or that a household has there are a large number of people in a household, or there is particular hardship? I think it would be useful for the Minister to explain his expectations for a waiver policy. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Tangi Aotearoa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to turn now to clause 64. This is the ability or requirement for a water organisation to basically publish the list of charges. So we're already in a situation where the transfer has taken place. They've gone through a process of identifying what the various charges might be. And one of the interesting things with this clause is that it basically identifies the fact that there is an accountability frame here, that water organisations will be not just expected but required to basically set out their full list of charges. And consumers are familiar with this, you know, as they get an electricity bill, or if they get a rates notice, they are always broken down. So certainly support the public accountability sort of aspect of requiring these entities and organisations to publish the list, and for that to be on a frequent sort of basis. So too with the requirement for the organisations, if they charge a particular fee or a rate and then a change follows, for them to basically go ahead and make the publicly available list known in the charge that it has been changed. What I don't see, though, in this particular section is reference to the consequence where organisations don't actually do that. So elsewhere in this bill, we have examples where there is an expectation, and if things don't happen, then there is a consequence. We saw that with the Consumer Trust Bill, where someone is liable on conviction to a certain fine. The Minister didn't address that at the time. Okay, park that. But where is the consequence for an organisation who fail to either publish the list of charges, or they fail to follow up in a reasonable time frame to publish a list of charges or a change to a charge once the change has been authorised by the entity or the organisation? There is nothing in this particular section, and I guess that lends itself to an argument about if there is nothing, should there be something? Because otherwise there is effectively, you know, on the one hand we're saying we want to be publicly, or the government's saying they want to be publicly accountable and transparent. Totally accept that. I think that is a good move. I would support that. But so too is the requirement that if these entities don't actually follow through with that, well, what is the consequence? What is the consequence? So I'd like to hear from the Minister where is there a consequence? And if there isn't, maybe it's caught up in a catch-all that, if there's certain provision of sections not met, then this is the consequence or the penalty provision, but there is no penalty provision. And if not, how can the public have confidence in the ability for these organisations to actually follow through with that, to be transparent, if there isn't not just an obligation, but a sanction that would be imposed if they were not to do so?
Celia Wade-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koe te minita. I wanted to ask some questions about Clause 109 and the Crown exemptions from development contributions. And earlier on there was a reasonable amount of questioning and, in my view, some unhelpful answers talking about why central government chose not to fund, not to support local government in the water services area. But on 109, it suggests that the Crown should be exempt from development contributions. So it sounds to me like the Minister's expecting local government to subsidise central government, because development contributions are created for a reason, so that growth that requires new infrastructure pays for that infrastructure. And in particular, I find it egregious that Aotearoa should, it's so nice to see the Te Reo First Homes and Communities should expect to pay. So we're expecting public housing, which then has to extract rental payments from our often most impoverished, is going to pay development contributions. But if the Ministry of Regulation set up a brand spanking new office, let's say maybe in Epsom, just to be convenient for commuting, they wouldn't pay development contributions. I would like the Minister to answer why the Crown, in its most supportive area, has to pay development contributions, but in other parts of the Crown, which may be essential or may not be essential, but are certainly not providing low-income housing, is expected to pay. I'd like to refer him to Aotearoa, the local government management organisation, also Infrastructure New Zealand and Water New Zealand, and many councils submitted that the Crown should not be exempt from development contributions, and they wanted the clause 109 to be deleted. They did not necessarily draw that distinction between the Crown as in Aotearoa and in other manifestations of the Crown, but why? At least there should be an exemption that the Crown applies for in specific examples. And Whangarei District Council's got a specific recommendation to change this clause so that instead of making the Crown exempt, their assessment criterion is on the impact of any development. So we do think that the equivalent regime, the Local Government Act, is out of date. It's inconsistent with a partnership between central and local government, and I think from memory, and the local government minister and the minister for this bill may like to comment on whether this is consistent with his view of a partnership between central and local government. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you very much, members, for those questions. In regards to questions in regards to consequences and ministerial intervention in regards to clauses 64, the consequences and the provisions for monitoring and ministerial intervention are included within the Local Government Act and not this Act, as mentioned on a few occasions already, so out of scope. But that's where the member can find that information. In regards to clause 109 around the exemption portion noted there, this is basically a continuation of the status quo. Development contributions are being replaced by a new development levy mechanism, again, that I noted last evening, under the Going for Housing Growth Policy. Another question asked in regards to, I didn't get the clause number, but the waiver policy. Basically, this is providing for local choice. It's really up to the local water organisation and the shareholding council to determine the appropriate mechanisms and when that waiver policy will be put into place.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Thank you, and thank you for answering my question about the waiver policy. I appreciate that it's up to the council then, or the water organisation. You touched on last night, and you just touched on it then again, about the changes to the development contributions from the primary legislation being the Local Government Act, changing at some point in the future to development levies. And so a question then is, how does he foresee those changes impacting on all these provisions in this bill relating to development contributions? And I also query the lack of criteria for the waiver policy, which he just, the Minister just said is about choice, and note that in the development contributions, which is often a bigger amount of money than what a waiver would be, I acknowledge that, but at what happens in the bill at 87 is the contents of development contributions policy, and at C, 1C, it refers to section explained by reference to the considerations set out in section 101.3 sub 3 of the LGA 2002, why the water organisation has determined to use the funding sources referred to. And then if you go to section 101.3 of the LGA, it does then say the funding needs of the local authority must be met from those sources following that the local authority determines to be appropriate following consideration of, in relation to each activity to be funded, the community outcomes to which the activity primarily contributes, and the distribution of benefits between the community as a whole, any identifiable part of the community and individuals, and the period that those benefits are expected to occur, and the extent to which the action or inaction of a particular individual or a group contributes to the need to undertake that activity, and the cost benefits for transparency. So my point is, there you have some criteria in a statute that seem sensible and also give enough room for the local water organisation to work out how they're going to do the development contribution under those criteria. So why not have criteria for the waiver policy and include in those criteria the issues of equity that seem to be missing from everywhere in this bill. And then noting as well that this government, and apologies if there are changes made to the Local Government Act by this Act later on, but this government has said that it's going to get rid of it was going to change the purpose of the Local Government Act to get rid of the 4 well-beings. So if you don't have those well-beings, what room will that constrain the council's ability to consider what equity issues under the waiver policy? And has he considered the interactions between the proposed changes to the Local Government Act and then how they'll play out in this water services framework with these new entities that won't have those well-beings to fall back on to consider issues of equity? And is that in fact his point?
Ryan Hamilton.
I move that debate on this question now close.
Tangi Utikiri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got some questions that relate to subpart 2 in the development contributions space. In particular, I want to look at clause 81, and this is about the development contributions agreements that would be entered into, and basically what is a legislative requirement to share the information that's been made available. Now, this clause it's proposed is quite some significant change, a lot of it around the wording that's to be used as well. But this is only applicable where a organisation, a ward organisation, seeks to adopt a policy for DCs under the provisions of this law. They do need to be able to request relevant information in order to assess DC levels, but there is a provision there around the information being made, reasonably available. My question for the government progressing this bill is really around how the government intends that there will be a guarantee or an assurance that this information will be shared and made in a timely manner. What we're hearing a lot from the Minister is that there are provisions already contained in other legislation to guide this, whether it's a carrot or a stick sort of approach. And I do thank the Minister for his answers around that. The one around, he answered my question around what sort of consequence or penalty provision exists. Very helpful, Minister. Thank you for identifying that. But my question is around, how the government intends to ensure that data sharing or information sharing that's provided is transparent, but also that there is some accountability around that, because if it's the water services organisation seeking to gather that information and where they request it from, the current approach in many circumstances is it requires a proactive release on the local territorial's part, or it's in response to some other method like Lagoima when it concerns the sector. So question there around how the government intends that will be transparent, but also there'll be a level of accountability around that as well. When it concerns clause 83, and this is around, okay, all of that happens, now what is going to be the consequential or the resultant limit on the policy for an authority around DCs or contributions of a financial nature? Again, what sort of approach is the government thinking around ensuring that the timeliness of organisations to update that information, particularly councils, is going to be done in a timely way? There is nothing in here except to say that, yes, they must amend it in order to remove duplication that exists because it's contained within the water organisation's DC policy. But where is there within that sort of suite of provisions a requirement that there is going to be, councils updating, sharing that promptly, accurately, in a timely manner? And if so, what sort of support will be available to councils as part of that transition process?
Madam Chair.
The Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to clauses 81 and 83, the question is primarily seeking guidance around additional powers to ensure that the information disclosure components outlined in the bill actually do occur, and if they don't, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that they do. I've outlined already the ministerial intervention powers. In addition to that, as part of this, these entities will be subject to economic regulation by the Commerce Commission, and the Commerce Commission, as a member will be aware, has a multitude of powers and mechanisms in order to ensure that information is provided in a manner that is appropriate. The ability for that independent organisation to achieve its means, it has a variety of tools within its toolkit to do that, both soft and hard, and we'll consider those mechanisms as appropriate. In addition to that, the reporting of this information in a public manner, including some of the work the government is doing in regards to reporting and increasing transparency and accountability of local government, are also other mechanisms. So there is a multitude of mechanisms in order to achieve the outcome and protect and ensure that the outcome is achieved as the member is outlining.
Madam Chair.
Celia Wade-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not convinced that the Minister fully answered the question about why Aotearoa was the exception, and maybe he can be more fulsome in his answer there. But my question now is on clause 168A. We've recently, through the Statutes Amendment Bill, had some discussion in the Governance and Administration Select Committee about when audio-visual and when audio links are appropriate. And I note that under subsection bracketed 5, it says, for the purposes of, but without limiting, subsection 4, the provider may allow any person to present their views to the territorial authority by way of audio link or audio visual link. And my question is, why be so equivocal? Why not say they must allow them? Some people will want to come in person. They find that more convincing, more convenient. But in the Wairarapa electorate, it's fairly thinly populated. People are often a long way away from the council office. And you usually get a 5 or 10 minute opportunity to present. So it is just not efficient nor inclusive, in my view, to say that it's up to the provider to choose whether they should be able to do audio link or audio visual link. And I'm just interested in why, Larn Farm has a proposed amendment to strengthen that, but why would he discourage a provider from having to make that provision? In this day and age, it certainly won't be the territorial authority that lacks the capacity for having audio link or audio visual link. We certainly don't have to worry in this example if it is audio only. Many rural properties have, unfortunately, less than stellar internet access. Whereas, again, going back to that example in the Statutes Amendment Bill, it was quite clear that it needed to be audio-visual, so you could be quite clear that somebody wasn't being coerced. I don't think anyone's going to be coerced in making a submission to a territorial authority. So quite happy that it's audio link or audio-visual link, but not at all happy with them not being required to provide that.
Dan Bidwell.
I move the debate on this question now close.
I'm not going to put the question just yet, as long as there is new material coming through. Honourable Rachel.
Madam Chair, sorry.
Oh, so I'd already called.
Well, I was going to answer here. Okay.
Honourable Simon Watts.
Thank you for the opportunity. Clause 168A, sub clause 5, actually enables the use of audio and audio-visual services. The precedent that may exist in the status quo is that option is not. So it's providing additional mechanisms. Again, not one size fits all, but that's the purpose of that clause.
Honourable Rachel Brooken.
Madam Chair. Yes, I'd like to move on to subpart 3, and I know other people might be on other subparts, but this is about water service networks connections. And my questions are really around bylaws. So 1.10 is bylaws for the purposes of connections. And again, it might be useful for the Minister to explain the different terms that are being used that he says were well traversed in a select committee that I wasn't on, and a select committee that doesn't have Hansard recorded like this House does. And why it's relevant to this point is because a water services bylaw can be made this is a territorial authority making this bylaw about connections. But then there's a reference in 1A to a water services bylaw being made under section 347. And if you go to 347, I acknowledge it's in a different part of the bill, but it's about water service providers making bylaws. So I'm interested in the relationship between the bylaws, the different bylaws made by the Territorial Authority and the water service providers, and also the Select Committee seems to have amended quite a lot of this section about the bylaws, and there's and this isn't a change, there's a three-step approach about approval of concept plans, approval of engineering plans, and sign-off. So everything about this bylaw, and this section 110, seems to be about new connections. So I'm wondering if there's any provision for bylaws relating to existing connections that might need some sort of authorisation or some change, or is it only to new connections, and what happens if those triggers don't need to exist? So if there is no resource consent, which comes up later. And I'm also wondering, given that water services connections are probably quite similar around the country, if there's any desire from the Minister for a template bylaw to be produced for those water services providers, or if they'd be encouraged to work together so that it was the same throughout the country, and where those differences might lie. But again, how this bylaw about the water services connection made by the Territorial Authority will link into those other bylaws made by the water services provider, and what the difference is.
Lawrence Sunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to get a very quick clarification from the Minister first. In both the amendment paper 346 and also in the original version from the Select Committee, would the Minister help clarify where does subpart 5 start? Because I can see subpart 4, accessing land to carry out water services infrastructure work, starts at clause 115, but I can't see a subheading for subpart 5, and then we go to subpart 6, trade waste discharges in clause 149. That's just more of a formatting question for the Minister, if the Minister wouldn't mind clarifying. I think my section is related to subpart 4, accessing land to carry out water services infrastructure work, and I want to ask the Minister specifically around clause 129 and 130. Now, the reason I want to focus on this area, which is around appeal relating to Māori-owned land and appeal to both to the Māori Land Court and the Māori Appellate Court, is because this is one of the few sections in Part 3 that has a substantial change between Amendment Paper 346 and the version that came out of the department, that came out of the Select Committee. So in the Amendment Paper 346, Clause 129 has added subclause 5 and 6. And I want to focus on subclause 6 here, because in the previous version, when we're looking at 129, it doesn't specify in terms of the reviewer's determination. But in this case, what we're looking at is a separation between when an owner of Māori land appeal and when a water services provider appeal. And I wanted to check with the Minister on the rationale on splitting those two, and then in subsection 6 of 129, they give very specific instructions on elements that the Māori Land Court may make orders on.
I'm sorry to interrupt the member, but it is time to report progress.
The House is resumed.
Madam Speaker, the committee has considered the Local Government Water Services Bill and reports that it has made progress on the bill. Madam Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. This bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. today.